He was the wealthiest man in the room, and he chose her, not the woman in the silk dress, not the heiress laughing near the bar. He walked past all of them and extended his hand to the woman sitting alone at the overflow table, wearing a dress she'd ironed 3 times because it was the only one she owned that didn't have a frayed hem. Nobody understood it. Nobody forgot it. And here's the thing nobody tells you about a single moment. Sometimes one dance, one accidental Tuesday night conversation, one porch light left on too long, is the entire beginning of a life you never planned for. This is that story. Stay until the end. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this one travels. The wedding invitation said 7 o'clock. Ethan Vale arrived at 7:43, which was either fashionably late or profoundly rude depending on who you asked, and he genuinely did not care which. He handed his jacket to the coat check without looking up. He accepted a glass of champagne from a passing tray without tasting it. He scanned the room the way a man scans an airport terminal, efficiently, without sentiment, looking only for the gate that would get him through this with the least amount of friction. The Hartwell ballroom was everything he'd expected and nothing he wanted. Ivory tablecloths, floral centerpieces that probably cost more than some people's rent, a string quartet playing something classical near the windows, half drowned out by the rising noise of 200 people who hadn't seen each other in years and were now desperately reminding each other of that fact. Ethan knew maybe 12 of those 200 people. He'd been invited because Marcus Chen, the groom, was his college roommate from a lifetime ago, back when Ethan Vale was just a kid from Cincinnati with a scholarship and a second-hand laptop and ideas that kept him up until 3 in the morning. Marcus had stayed in touch through everything, through the first failed startup, through the divorce, through the years when Ethan rebuilt himself into something the financial press would eventually call quietly terrifying in the best way. Marcus was good people, so Ethan came. He found his name card on table 4, solid placement, near the front, surrounded by people he vaguely recognized from Marcus's firm. He made his way there, shook 2 hands, kissed one cheek, forgot everyone's name immediately, and then discovered that his chair had somehow been given to a late-arriving cousin of the bride's mother who had flown in from Phoenix and apparently required that exact seat due to a hip situation that Ethan did not feel qualified to dispute. So they moved him. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Vale," the wedding coordinator whispered, already backing away as she gestured toward the far corner of the ballroom. "We have you at table 9, just for tonight. Everything's lovely over there, I promise." Table 9 was the overflow table. He knew it the moment he saw it. Every wedding has one. The table that exists not by design but by arithmetic. The chairs that don't quite match. The centerpiece that's slightly smaller. The location tucked just far enough from the dance floor that the people sitting there feel like they're watching a movie through a window. It's where you put the people who matter enough to invite but not enough to plan for. There were 4 people already seated when Ethan arrived. An older gentleman who appeared to be asleep. A couple in their mid-40s who were having a quiet, sustained argument using only their eyes. And then, at the far end of the table, sitting very straight and very still, with her hands folded around a glass of water like it was the most important thing in the room. A woman. She was looking at the string quartet, not at her phone, not at the other guests, not scanning the room for someone more interesting to talk to. She was listening to the music with the particular kind of attention that people only give things they actually love, and it made her look, for just a moment, like she was somewhere else entirely. Ethan pulled out the chair beside her, not because he was trying to be charming, but because it was the only empty seat that wasn't directly next to the sleeping man, and sat down. She didn't look over immediately. He didn't say anything immediately. The quartet finished their piece. There was a smattering of applause from nearby tables, the kind that's polite rather than enthusiastic. Then she turned and she looked at him the way people look at someone who has just appeared in their peripheral vision, not startled, just adjusting. "Sorry," Ethan said, though he wasn't sure what he was apologizing for. "They moved me." "Table 9, she said. "Table 9. I wondered if they'd fill the rest of the seats." She glanced around. "I've been here since 7. "You're early." "I didn't want to be late." She said it simply, without embarrassment, the way you say something that is just true. "I didn't know anyone, and I didn't want to walk in when everyone was already seated and have to find my place with people watching." Ethan looked at her. That was an unusually honest thing to say to a stranger. Nora, she said, and offered her hand. Ethan. They shook hands. Hers was cold from the water glass. How do you know them? He asked. Marcus and Sophie. She smiled at the name. I renovated her bathroom 3 years ago, back when she was still in the apartment on Fenwick. She's one of those people who actually stays in touch afterward, sends Christmas cards, remembered my birthday once. She paused. I was a little surprised she invited me, honestly. A wedding is different from a Christmas card. It's a nice thing to do, Ethan said. It is. She looked across the ballroom to where Sophie, radiant in a gown that had clearly been designed with love and probably terror, was working her way around the tables, touching shoulders, pressing cheeks. She's a good person. Some people just are. Ethan drank his champagne. He hadn't planned to stay more than 2 hours. He'd said so to his housekeeper, Mrs. Donnelly, before leaving. I'll be back by 10. Have something light ready for Lily if she wakes up. Lily, who was 5 and had her mother's eyes and his stubborn streak, and was currently asleep under Mrs. Donnelly's watchful care 3 miles from here. What do you do? Nora asked. For work. Finance, he said. She nodded slowly like she was filing the information in a way that said she didn't plan to do much with it. I'm in renovation, flooring mostly, sometimes walls, whatever needs doing. Do you like it? The question seemed to catch her slightly off guard, not because it was intrusive, just because it wasn't what people usually asked. Usually people heard renovation and moved on to either a story about their own home repairs or a segue back to themselves. Mostly, she said after thinking about it, I like the way things look before and after. There's something satisfying about something being genuinely better than it was. She looked down at her water. The work itself is hard on your body, and the money's unreliable. But yeah, mostly I like it. That's an honest answer. You asked an honest question. The dinner arrived. Chicken for most of the table, a vegetarian option for the couple in the corner who had momentarily paused their silent argument. Ethan ate more of his meal than he'd expected to. Nora ate carefully, the way people eat at other people's tables when they're trying to be polite about enjoying something they don't usually have access to. Not slowly, not reluctantly, but with a certain deliberate pleasure. They talked about the food. They talked about the centerpiece, which featured a flower that neither of them could name. Ethan made a guess, a bird of paradise maybe, and Nora said she'd heard that once and wasn't sure if it was right. They talked about the older gentleman at the end of the table who remained asleep through the entire main course, and whom they eventually decided was named Gerald and was probably someone's great-uncle and deserved to be left in peace. Somewhere around the salad course, something shifted. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a single moment. It was more like the conversation just settled into a different register, the way a song moves from a verse to something quieter in the bridge. You said you came alone, Nora said. Yeah. You're not... She seemed to reconsider the question. I'm not, he said. Not anymore. Separated 2 years ago. Divorced about 6 months after. He said it the way you say things that have been said enough times they no longer have edges. My daughter lives with me. Lily. She's 5. Nora was quiet for a moment. Is she with someone tonight? My housekeeper. She adores Lily, probably more patient than I am. He paused. Lily asked me this morning if I was going to a party. What did you say? I said it was a wedding. What did she say? A small pull at the corner of his mouth. She said, is a wedding a party with crying? And I said, yes, pretty much. And she thought about it and said, okay, but don't cry because it's embarrassing, Daddy. Nora laughed. It was a real laugh, the kind that comes out before you can decide whether to let it. A little surprised, a little delighted. She sounds like a handful, Nora said. She's everything, Ethan said. He hadn't meant it to sound as raw as it did. But Nora didn't make a face about it. She just nodded, and that small acknowledgement, the way she just let it sit there without turning it into a moment, made him relax slightly. What about you? He asked. No kids? She smiled, but it was a slightly complicated one. No marriage either. There was someone. A while back, it just didn't work. She moved on quickly, not defensive, just done with that particular avenue. I live on Carver Street now. I moved there about 18 months ago. Ethan went very still. Carver Street, he repeated. Yeah, number 41. Why, do you know it? I live on Carver Street. She stared at him. You're joking. I'm not, number 38. They looked at each other for a moment with the expression people get when coincidence arrives, wearing a name tag. I've seen your porch light, she said slowly, the one that stays on late. I work late. I know. I've walked past your house. I assumed... She stopped. I assumed the person who lived there had a lot of staff. Honestly, the house is... It's a lot, he said. It's beautiful, she said, and she meant it plainly, without envy, just observation. There are window boxes on the second floor. Someone planted geraniums. Mrs. Donnelly, she said Lily needed to learn about plants. He looked down at his plate. She's probably right. The string quartet transitioned to something slower. More tables were finishing dinner. A restless energy was beginning to move through the room. The specific anticipation that settles in just before a wedding reception shifts from eating to dancing. Ethan became aware, somewhere around this moment, that he'd been at this table for over an hour and it had not felt like an hour, which was unusual. Most rooms felt long to him lately. The MC, a cheerful man with a wireless mic who had been making the rounds, stepped up to the front of the room and announced that before the formal first dance, the bride had requested something, a kind of tradition, he said. She wanted every guest, every single one, to share at least one dance with someone tonight. Even table 9, he added, with the confidence of a man who had done this at enough weddings to know that table 9 always needed the specific invitation. A few polite laughs. The sleeping man at the end stirred. The couple in the corner were already turning toward each other, their silent argument apparently dissolved by the prospect of dancing. Ethan looked at Nora. Nora was looking at her hands. I'm not a very good dancer, he said. I know 2 steps, she said, both of them wrong. He stood up anyway, not with the fluid confidence of a man who makes grand gestures. He knocked his napkin off the table and had to pick it up first, which made the moment considerably less cinematic. He straightened and he held out his hand and he said, without decoration, Want to be bad at this together? She looked at his hand for just a beat too long, not calculating, more like something was passing through her, some quiet surprise. And then she took it. The dance floor was more crowded than either of them had expected. They found a small patch of space near the edge, not quite in the middle, not quite in the corner. The song was slow, something orchestral and vaguely familiar that neither of them could have named. He put his hand on her waist. She put her hand on his shoulder. They found a cautious rhythm that was more like swaying than dancing, which was fine. For the first 30 seconds, it was exactly what it was, 2 people being decent to each other at a wedding. Then something happened. It was small. He couldn't have told you afterward what changed. Maybe it was the way the light shifted when someone moved a lamp near the window. Maybe it was the way she stopped counting steps under her breath. He could see her lips moving slightly and then going still. Maybe it was just that after a certain amount of time, 2 people standing close together either become awkward or they become something else. They became something else. She wasn't tense anymore, and he wasn't performing courtesy anymore. He was just present, in a way he rarely was in rooms full of people, in a way he rarely was anywhere that wasn't his daughter's bedtime. They didn't talk for the first part of the song. There was something about not filling the silence that felt unexpectedly like trust. Your daughter, Nora said quietly near the end. What's she like? Loud, he said. Specific. She has opinions about everything. What color the towels should be, which spoon is the right spoon for cereal. A pause. She told me last week that she doesn't want to be a princess when she grows up. She wants to be a paleontologist. She knows what a paleontologist is? She informed me it means dinosaur scientist. She's very clear on that. Nora's hand, resting on his shoulder, moved slightly. Not pulling away, just settling, like she'd found a more natural place. She sounds wonderful, she said. She's the only thing I've done right in the last 3 years, he said. He hadn't meant to say that either. It came out the way things come out when you've been running so fast and so long that you don't notice when you've stopped. Nora didn't fill it with reassurance. She didn't say, "I'm sure that's not true," or "You seem like you're doing great." She just held what he'd said. The song was ending. The tempo was changing somewhere in the strings, a slight shift upward that meant this particular piece of time was almost over. "Thank you," she said when they stepped apart. Formal, but not cold. Real. "Thank you," he said. They walked back to table 9. Gerald was fully awake now and eating a piece of wedding cake someone had placed in front of him. The couple in the corner were laughing about something. The ballroom felt warmer, or maybe that was just the increased body heat of 200 people who had all been persuaded to move. Ethan sat down, picked up his champagne, and then Nora, still looking out at the dance floor, said it quietly, not looking at him when she said it. "Everyone saw you choose me, you know." He looked at her. "There were women in this room who expected you to ask them," she said. She wasn't angry about it. She wasn't fishing for a compliment. She was just naming a thing that was true, the way she named things that were true. Women who probably thought they were more the kind of woman you'd ask. "Maybe," he said. "Does that bother you, that people noticed?" He thought about it, actually thought about it, instead of just producing a comfortable answer. "No," he said finally. "Does it bother you that people noticed he chose you?" She was quiet for a moment. "I think it might matter," she said. "I'm just not sure yet which way." He left the wedding at 10:15, later than he'd planned. He drove home through streets that were quiet and lit with the particular orange of suburban streetlights, and when he turned onto Carver Street, he did something he'd never consciously done before. He looked at the houses as individual things, not just as the backdrop of his commute. The one with the dark windows, the one with the basketball hoop, the one with the small porch where someone had set out 2 chairs that didn't match. Number 41 had a light on in the front window. He drove past it and pulled into his own driveway. Sat for a moment with the engine off. Mrs. Donnelly met him at the door with a look that said everything was fine, and also that she wanted to go home, which he completely understood, and he thanked her and locked the door and went upstairs. Lily was asleep in the precise position she always slept in, flat on her back, arms out to the sides like she'd dropped from a great height, mouth slightly open. Her pajamas had dinosaurs on them. She'd picked them herself. He stood in the doorway for a while. He thought about a woman who had been listening to a string quartet when he sat down, who said she arrived early because she didn't want people to see her looking for her place, who knew about his geraniums, who took his hand for a dance and didn't make it complicated and then said, in a voice that wasn't asking for anything, "Everyone saw you choose me." He thought about the way she said, "I'm not sure yet which way." He thought about the light on in number 41. He went to bed. He did not fall asleep immediately, which was usual, but the thing he lay awake thinking about was different from the usual things. In the morning, Lily wanted pancakes shaped like dinosaurs, which he attempted with diminishing success, and she informed him gravely that his triceratops looked like a hat. "It's a triceratops," he said. "It's a hat with bumps," she said. He ate his misshapen triceratops hat pancake and thought about what he needed to get done that week. His company, Vale Capital, which managed assets with a discretion that most of his neighbors on Carver Street would have found genuinely staggering, had 3 deals in progress that required his attention. His assistant, Jordan, had sent 14 emails since midnight. There was a board call at 2. He drank his coffee. He thought about number 41. He thought about how strange it was that a woman he'd spoken to for 3 hours had managed to make herself into a question he didn't have an answer to yet. He didn't do anything about it that day, or the next day, because he was a careful man and he'd learned, slowly, expensively, the way you learn things that cost you something, that acting on feeling without thinking first was how you ended up in exactly the kind of situation he'd spent 2 years climbing out of. But on Thursday, walking back from the mailbox in the thin November sunlight, he saw her. She was on her porch, sitting in one of the mismatched chairs. She had a mug of something and she was reading a paperback with the spine so broken it might as well have been a sheaf of loose pages. She was wearing a heavy sweater that was slightly too big for her, and her feet were bare on the cold wood, which suggested she had come outside quickly without thinking about it. She didn't see him immediately. He stood at his mailbox longer than necessary. Then she looked up. There was a brief pause, the specific pause of two people who have only met once and are calculating whether to acknowledge it. And then she raised her mug in a small, unhurried greeting. He raised his handful of mail. She went back to her book. He went inside. But the next morning he found himself on the porch at roughly the same time. And so did she. And this time, the distance between number 38 and number 41 felt shorter than 3 houses. "Cold morning," she called. "Yeah." "Did you see that thing with Gerald at the wedding?" she said. "I heard he gave a speech." "He did. It was 6 minutes long and contained 3 separate references to fishing." She laughed. Again, that unguarded laugh. "Sophie texted me," she said. "They made it to their honeymoon fine." "Marcus texted me a photo of a beach. Good. They deserve a beach." He thought about asking if she'd had breakfast. He did not ask. He went back inside and ate alone at his kitchen island with Jordan's emails open on his laptop and Lily's cereal bowl still on the counter because she'd eaten fast and run and he hadn't gotten around to it yet. The next day he asked, "Have you eaten?" She looked slightly surprised. "It's 8 in the morning. That's usually when people eat breakfast." "I had coffee." "That's not breakfast." She tilted her head at him. "Are you offering to feed me, Ethan Vale from number 38? "I'm asking a question," he said. "From Ethan Vale from number 38. She came inside, Winte. His kitchen was enormous. Hers, she would later tell him, was the size of a large closet with ambitions. She looked around the kitchen at the professional-grade range and the marble island and the hanging copper pots, and she didn't say anything for a moment, and he was aware, uncomfortably, of the gap between number 38 and number 41 as a physical, concrete thing. "I'm sorry," he said, not sure exactly what he was apologizing for, but feeling like something deserved it. "Why?" She sounded genuinely curious. I know it's a lot." She turned and looked at him. "Ethan, it's a kitchen." She pulled out a stool at the island and sat down. "Do you have eggs?" He made scrambled eggs. He was a competent cook in a limited way. He'd had to become one after the divorce, because Lily needed to eat, and he was suddenly doing more things alone than he'd ever planned. The eggs were good, not chef quality, but real. He put toast on and found jam in the back of the refrigerator that turned out to be technically still good. They ate at the island. Lily appeared at 7:45 in her dinosaur pajamas, stopped dead in the kitchen doorway, and stared at Nora with the unfiltered intensity that 5-year-olds deploy when they encounter something unexpected. "Hi," Lily said. "Hi," Nora said. "Who are you?" "I'm Nora. I live down the street." Lily thought about this for 3 full seconds. "Do you like dinosaurs?" "I think they're very important," Nora said, with complete seriousness. Lily climbed up onto the stool beside her. "My favorite is the Stegosaurus," she said, as if beginning a lecture she'd been preparing for some time. Ethan watched this from the other side of the island with a spatula in his hand and something happening in his chest that he didn't quite have a name for. She left at 9:15. She had a job, a kitchen reno in a house on the east side of town, a week of work at least, and she needed to be there by 9:30. He walked her to the door. "Thank you for breakfast," she said. "Thank you for eating it." She laughed, and then she stopped laughing and just looked at him for a moment, the way she'd looked at the string quartet, like she was listening to something. "This is a little unexpected," she said. "Yeah," he said. "I'm not—" She stopped. Started again. "I've been through a version of this before. Something that seemed like it was real and wasn't. And I don't want to—" She pressed her lips together. "I'm not good at things that seem like one thing and turn out to be another." "I'm not offering you something that seems like one thing," he said. He meant it plainly, not as a promise. It was too early for promises, just as a declaration of intent. She studied him for a moment. "Okay," she said, and she went to work. He stood in the doorway and watched her get into the beat-up pickup truck she used for renovation work, the back of it carrying a dented toolbox and a roll of floor samples. She pulled out of the street without looking back. The street was quiet again. He went inside, picked up Lily's cereal bowl, put it in the dishwasher. He did not go back to his emails immediately. He stood at the kitchen window for a while, looking down the street at the house 3 doors away, at the mismatched porch chairs and the light she'd left on inside, and he thought about what she'd said. I'm not good at things that seem like one thing and turn out to be another. He thought about how that was maybe the most direct warning he'd ever received, and how it hadn't felt like a warning at all. It had felt like someone drawing an honest map. He thought about his daughter in the next room, who was now, based on the sounds coming from the living room, doing something inadvisable with the couch cushions. He thought about the wedding, the overflow table, the way she'd been listening to music like it actually meant something. He went to deal with the couch cushions. But the question that had started 3 nights ago, standing in a driveway with the engine off, was still there. It was just taking its time. Some things, Ethan Vale was beginning to suspect, didn't ask permission before they became important. They just did. The kitchen breakfast happened on a Thursday. By Friday, Ethan had told himself it was a one-time thing. A neighborly gesture, nothing more. By Saturday, he was annoyed at himself for thinking about it. By Sunday morning, he was standing at his kitchen window with his second cup of coffee, watching the street without admitting to himself that he was watching the street. Her truck wasn't in front of number 41. She worked Saturdays, apparently. He filed that away without meaning to. He spent Sunday the way he spent most Sundays, managing the quiet chaos of being a single parent to a 5-year-old who treated weekends as an opportunity to demand things that required creativity and patience, neither of which Ethan had in unlimited supply. Lily wanted to build a fort in the living room. He helped, badly, and the fort collapsed twice before they agreed on a design that involved the dining room chairs and most of the spare blankets in the house. Lily declared it a dinosaur research station. Ethan sat inside it, cross-legged with his laptop, answering emails while she explained the Cretaceous period to a stuffed bear named Professor Waffles. It was not a dignified way for a man who ran a billion-dollar operation to spend a Sunday afternoon. It was also the best part of his week. He put Lily to bed at 7:30. She wanted 2 stories, the one about the brave girl who sailed through a storm, and the one about the dragon who was afraid of the dark. And he read both of them, doing different voices for each character because she'd made it clear early on that reading without voices was unacceptable. He turned her lamp down to the lowest setting, the one she called Sleepy Orange, and stood in the doorway until her breathing slowed. Then he went to his study. The study was the one room in the house that looked like what it actually was. The working space of a man who had built something large and complicated and never fully switched off from it. 3 screens on the main desk, a wall of reference binders that Jordan updated quarterly, a whiteboard with numbers on it that would have meant a great deal to the right person and nothing at all to most people. A leather chair that had cost more than Nora's monthly rent, he suspected, without taking any particular pride in that. He worked until 11. He was good at it, focused, systematic, the kind of thinker who could hold 4 problems in his head simultaneously and move between them without losing the thread. It had taken years to build that capacity. It had also, his ex-wife had pointed out more than once, made him exhausting to live with. At 11:15, he got up to get water. He passed the front window. Number 41 had a light on. He stood there for a moment longer than he needed to. She was home. She'd been at work all day and she was home now, at 11:15 on a Sunday night, with a light on in her front window. He thought about her in that small house, in whatever small way she'd made it hers. He thought about what she'd said at the wedding. There's something satisfying about something being genuinely better than it was. He went back to his study. He did not work as efficiently for the remainder of the evening. The next time he saw her was Tuesday. She was at the mailbox, actually getting mail, which he'd begun to feel slightly performative about in his own case. And she was frowning at an envelope. "Bad news?" he said from his own driveway. She looked up. "Bill, I forgot about." She tucked it under her arm. "Nothing exciting." "I thought bills were exciting, in a specific kind of terrible way. This particular kind of terrible." She leaned against the mailbox post. She was in her work clothes, paint-spattered jeans, a thermal shirt with a small hole near the collar, work boots that had seen serious use. Her hair was tied back with something that looked like it might have originally been a rubber band for produce. She looked tired. Not defeated tired, just honestly tired, the way people look when they've worked a full day with their body and haven't pretended otherwise. "How's the kitchen reno going?" he asked. She looked mildly surprised that he'd remembered. "Slow. The owner keeps changing her mind about the backsplash. We were on quartz, then we were on subway tile. Now we're apparently considering something she described as earthy but not brown." "What does that mean?" "I genuinely don't know," Nora said. "I've been doing this 11 years and I still don't always know what people mean when they describe colors and feelings." She shook her head. "I showed her 6 samples yesterday. She said none of them were quite right, but she'd know it when she saw it." "That's a very specific kind of frustrating." "It's the primary frustration of the industry," she said. "Second only to people who decide they want to move a load-bearing wall." He laughed at that, actually laughed, not the polished social version, and she seemed lightly pleased by it. They stood there for a moment in the thin November air, 2 people at adjacent mailboxes with no particular reason to keep talking and no particular urgency to stop. "Have you eaten?" he asked. She gave him a look. "It's 5 o'clock. People eat at 5. People with children eat at 5. I have a child, and I'm about to make something, if you want." He paused, aware that this was beginning to establish a pattern, which was either a good thing or a complicated thing, and he hadn't decided which. "It's just pasta. Nothing elaborate." She looked at him for a moment, then at the bill under her arm, then back at him. "Okay," she said. The pasta was, by his own admission, not his best work. He overcooked the linguine by about 2 minutes, which Lily noticed immediately and announced loudly, and he told her that sometimes pasta was softer and that was fine. And she said Professor Waffles preferred al dente, and Nora, who was sitting at the kitchen island watching all of this with an expression of quiet entertainment, said she agreed with Professor Waffles in principle, but that this pasta was good. "You don't have to say that," he said. "I know," she said. "It's still good." Lily, who had taken to Nora with the frank immediacy of a child who makes decisions quickly and does not revisit them, spent most of dinner explaining the difference between carnivores and herbivores, directing her explanations primarily at Nora, who listened with the same attention she'd given the string quartet at the wedding. Full attention. Actual listening, not the kind where you're assembling your response while the other person is still talking. It was, Ethan noticed, a rare thing. After dinner, while he cleaned up, Nora sat with Lily at the kitchen table and looked through a library book about the Jurassic period that Lily had apparently checked out and not returned for 3 weeks. They turned pages together. Lily explained. Nora asked questions that were genuinely good questions, not the performative kind adults use to seem interested in children, but the kind that came from being actually interested. What did they eat when there was a drought? How did the big ones take care of babies? Were they loud? "Very loud," Lily said, with tremendous authority. "I believe you," Nora said. Ethan washed dishes and did not say anything and tried not to make too much of what he was seeing. He walked her to the door at 7 before Lily's bedtime routine. Nora paused on the porch, hands in her jacket pockets, looking out at the quiet street. "She's a good kid," she said. "She is." He leaned against the door frame. "She's also going to tell Mrs. Donnelly tomorrow that Professor Waffles now has a new opinion about pasta, so I'll be hearing about this." "Worth it," Nora said. A pause. The kind that's comfortable but aware of itself. "This is becoming a thing," she said. Not accusatory, just naming it. "Breakfast Thursday, dinner Tuesday," he agreed. "I see the pattern." "Does it feel like too much to you?" She was looking at the street when she asked, not at him. He thought about it honestly. "No, does it to you?" She was quiet for a moment. "It feels like something I should be careful about." "Because of the money thing," he said. Not a question. "Partly." She turned to look at him. "And partly because I'm not great at reading what's real. I thought I was once. And I was wrong in a way that cost me a few years." She paused. I'm not saying this isn't real. I'm saying I don't trust my own read on it yet." "That's fair," he said. You're not going to tell me I'm overthinking it? Why would I do that? You're being honest with me. She studied him, that steady, evaluating look she had. Most people would try to reassure me, she said. Most people haven't been wrong in ways that cost them things then, he said. Something moved across her face. Not quite a smile. Something quieter than that. Good night, Ethan, she said. Good night, Nora. He watched her walk down the street, hands still in her jacket pockets, not hurrying. She didn't look back. He'd noticed that about her. She said things and meant them and then moved forward. She didn't hover, didn't second-guess out loud. He found it oddly steadying. He went inside. Upstairs. Lily's room. Dinosaur pajamas, 2 stories, sleepy orange lamp. He sat on the edge of the bed afterward in the dark, listening to her breathe. He realized, genuinely happy tonight. Not the performance of it that he'd learned to produce at industry dinners and charity events, the actual, unremarkable, kitchen-smelling version of it. It was strange how strange it felt. The thing about building something slowly was that you didn't always notice it building. It happened in pieces too small to point to individually. It happened in the particular accumulation of small, ordinary moments that don't announce themselves. It happened in a Tuesday dinner becoming a semi-regular thing. In her truck parked outside 41 in the evenings, porch light on, which he noticed the way you notice a landmark once you've learned to look for it. In the way Lily started asking, on random weekday mornings, "Is Nora coming over?" Not with the urgency of a child who wants something, but with the casual expectation of a child who has decided that someone is just part of the regular landscape of her world. In late November, about 3 weeks after the wedding, something shifted again. It was a Wednesday evening. Ethan had a call that ran 2 hours longer than it should have, because one of his fund managers in London had made a judgment call that Ethan disagreed with, and the disagreement required the specific kind of careful, controlled conversation where you hold your actual reaction at arm's length and deploy the more useful one. By the time he got off the call, it was 9:30. Lily was asleep, and he had the specific headache that came from 2 hours of precise diplomacy. He went to the kitchen, stood in front of the open refrigerator for a while without deciding anything, closed it, went to the porch. He sat in one of his own porch chairs, which matched, because Mrs. Donnelly had opinions about furniture cohesion, and he just sat there. The night was cold and quiet. Carver Street had the particular stillness of a neighborhood where people went to bed at reasonable hours. The light in number 41 was on. Before he'd finished processing what he was doing, he'd picked up his phone and sent a text. "Still up?" A pause of about 30 seconds. "Yes." "Bad night?" He stared at his phone, then typed, "Long call. What are you doing?" "Nothing. Come over if you want." He sat on her porch. She brought out 2 mugs of tea that she'd made without asking him how he took it, which turned out to be with too much milk, but he didn't correct her. They sat in the mismatched chairs, and she asked him nothing about the call, and he said nothing about the call, and instead they talked about unimportant things. A neighbor's dog that had gotten loose that afternoon, a show she'd been watching that he hadn't seen, the fact that her gutters were going to need cleaning before the next rain, which she'd been putting off. "I can send someone," he said. She looked at him over her mug. "I'm not going to let you send someone to clean my gutters, Ethan. It's not... I have a contractor who handles the house maintenance. I could just ask him to add yours to the route." "That's sweet," she said. "And no. Because of the principle. Because of the principle." He could have pushed it. He didn't. He'd learned already, faster than he learned most things, which surprised him, that there was a specific line with Nora that had nothing to do with stubbornness. It had to do with her own particular dignity, the way she'd built her life with her hands and her work and without help that came with invisible strings, and she wasn't willing to start trading that in, even for small things, even for gutters. He respected it, even when it mildly frustrated him. "How do you do it?" he asked after a while. "Do what?" "The financial, the uncertainty of it. The jobs ending, new contracts, chasing payments." He knew enough about independent contracting to know it was a specific kind of stress, the kind without a net. "How do you not just..." How do you stay steady in it? She thought about this. She had a way of actually thinking before she answered things, which he found increasingly rare and increasingly valuable. I don't, always, she said. Last January, I had 6 weeks with no real work. I was doing small, odd jobs, caulking a bathtub here, painting a fence there. I had to borrow against the next month to cover rent. She turned the mug in her hands. I'm not great with money when there's plenty of it. I spend it on the wrong things. I'm better when there's less because then I have to be better. She paused. That's not a virtue. It's just how I'm built. You make it sound like a flaw. Some days it is. She looked at him directly. You're asking me this because you're trying to understand something about how different our lives are. He was quiet. You don't have to be diplomatic about it, she said. It's a reasonable thing to be trying to understand. I'm not uncomfortable with the difference, he said carefully. I'm trying to make sure I'm not making something easier on you in ways that change what this is. She was still for a moment. That's a very specific fear to have. My ex-wife, he stopped, started differently. After the divorce, I became aware that there were people around me who were there for specific reasons. Not malicious, just practical. And I became bad at knowing which was which. He looked down at his mug. I don't think you're here for practical reasons, but I'm aware that my judgment on that subject has not always been reliable. Nora was quiet for a long time, long enough that he looked up. She was watching him with an expression that was hard to read. Not hurt, not offended. More like she was looking at something she hadn't expected to find. I'm going to tell you something, she said, and I want you to take it the way I mean it, which is direct and not particularly romantic. Okay. I turned down a date last spring, she said. A guy I'd met through a job. He was decent, good job, nice enough, made it clear he was interested. And I said no because I was tired of things that felt like they might be okay. I wasn't looking for okay anymore. She set her mug down. I don't know what this is yet either, but it doesn't feel like okay. And that's the only reason I keep showing up to your kitchen. She paused. Not your kitchen, you. I keep showing up to you. He looked at her. Okay, he said. I know, she said. It's not very poetic. I don't need poetic, he said. She picked her mug back up. They sat in the cold for another 40 minutes, talking about nothing in particular and everything that mattered. And when he finally walked back down the street to number 38, his headache was gone, and the night felt like a different kind of thing than it had 2 hours ago. December arrived, and with it the specific kind of chaos that descended on Ethan's professional life every year as the calendar moved toward the close. Deal timelines compressed. Decisions that had been theoretical became concrete. His calendar, which Jordan managed with the precision of an air traffic controller, became a document that existed in 15-minute increments and allowed for very little that wasn't scheduled. He saw Nora in pieces. A morning here, a porch conversation there. A Tuesday dinner that happened because Lily asked for it specifically, which was becoming its own kind of argument that Ethan found difficult to counter. One evening in early December, he came home from a flight to New York. A day trip, in and out, one of those days that felt like 3, and found Nora's truck in front of 41 with the passenger door open and a set of floor samples sliding out of the back. He stopped. She was struggling with a large roll of vinyl sample material that had apparently decided to become uncooperative. It was half in the truck and half out, and she had it by both ends, and she was losing the battle in the specific slow way that inanimate objects win battles when they have gravity on their side. He walked over. I have it, she said immediately. I can see that, he said, and took the other end anyway. They got it back into the truck without speaking. She shut the passenger door. He stood there in his suit jacket that was the wrong weight for December, carrying his overnight bag, looking at her. She looked back at him. Long day? Long day. You look like you've been awake since 4. 5, he said. 4:30. She studied him for a moment. Then she said, Go inside. I'll come over in 20 minutes and we can eat something. You don't have to. I know I don't have to. She was already heading toward her front door. Go inside, Ethan. You look like you're going to fall over. He went inside. He changed out of the suit. He sat at the kitchen island for a few minutes doing absolutely nothing, which he almost never allowed himself, and which felt profoundly necessary. Mrs. Donnelly had left a note that Lily was bathed and in bed early because she'd been fighting a cold all day, and there was soup in the pot on the stove that just needed reheating. 22 minutes later, Nora knocked on the back door. She came in with a container of something she'd had in her refrigerator. Leftover rice and beans she'd made the night before, she said, which sounded humble but turned out to be seasoned with the confidence of someone who cooked real food in a real way. She reheated it alongside the soup. She put things on the table without being asked where things were, because by now she had a basic working knowledge of his kitchen that was both practical and something that made him aware of a particular warmth in his sternum. They ate. He told her about the meeting. Not the numbers, those weren't for telling, but the shape of the day. The early flight, the cab, the conference room on the 41st floor where the air was too cold. The other men in the room who were brilliant in ways that were simultaneously impressive and exhausting. She told him about her own day. The earthy but not brown client had finally settled on a terracotta tile that, in Nora's professional opinion, was going to be completely wrong for the kitchen lighting, but it was the client's kitchen and her own opinion about it. "Did you tell her it might not work?" he asked. "I said, this is beautiful, and I want to make sure we see it under the kitchen lighting before we commit. She said she'd think about it." "That's diplomatic." "I've learned," Nora said. "You can tell people the truth, or you can tell them the truth in a way they can hear it. Second one takes longer, but it actually sticks." "You'd be good at what I do," he said. She raised an eyebrow. "Finance?" "The people part of it." She laughed a little. "I think the money part might be a barrier." "The money part's actually the easier part," he said, meaning it. "The people part, reading what someone actually wants versus what they say they want, figuring out when to push and when to let it sit, that's the real job." She looked at him thoughtfully. "Do you like it? What you do?" Nobody asked him that. Or rather, people asked him that, but they asked it the way people ask things they already know the answer to. "Parts of it," he said. "Building something from a position, taking something undervalued and making it into what it should be. That part I genuinely like." He turned his fork over. The performance of it. The dinners and the positioning and the version of me that has to walk into certain rooms. That part I'm tired of. "What would you do if you could change it?" He thought about this. Actually thought. "Something smaller," he said. "Honestly, I've thought about stepping back from the main fund, running a smaller operation. Fewer deals, more considered." He paused. "But that requires letting go of things, and I'm not good at letting go of things I built." "No?" she said. "I wouldn't think you would be." "Is that a criticism?" "It's an observation." She met his eyes. "I don't think you're good at letting go of things in general, not just the business stuff." He looked at her across the table. She said it without edge, just that direct, steady way of hers. "No," he agreed. "I'm not." Month. The thing that changed sometime in mid-December was that Ethan stopped pretending to himself that he was being casual about this. It was not a dramatic realization. There was no particular moment. It was more that one day he noticed he'd stopped using the word neighborly to describe what this was, even in his own head, and the absence of that word left a shape behind it that was unmistakably something else. He noticed it when Lily had a fever on a Saturday and Nora showed up. Not because he'd asked, but because she'd seen his truck in the driveway all day and sent a text asking if everything was okay, and sat with Lily for 2 hours while he handled 2 calls he couldn't reschedule, reading to her in a steady, unhurried voice that Ethan could hear faintly from the study. He noticed it when Nora mentioned, in passing, that she'd gotten a bad review from a client, not the backsplash woman, a different one, someone who'd been unreasonable and had taken it to an online platform. And something tightened in Ethan's chest in a way that was entirely disproportionate to the situation. He noticed it when she laughed, genuinely and suddenly, at something Lily said at dinner one evening, and the laugh went through the room, and Lily laughed back, and the two of them were laughing together about something that had nothing to do with him, and he sat at the head of his own table and felt something he'd forgotten was possible. He noticed it, finally and specifically, on a Thursday evening when she was sitting in his living room with her feet tucked under her on his couch, reading, She was always reading something, always had a book happening. And he came downstairs from putting Lily to bed, and she looked up and said, "She asleep?" And he said, "Yeah." And she went back to her book. And the entire exchange had the texture of something that had been happening for years. He stood in the doorway for a moment. She turned a page. He sat down. She didn't say anything. He didn't say anything. There was a documentary on TV with the sound low, something about ocean wildlife, the kind of thing neither of them were actively watching, but that made the room feel inhabited. Outside, Carver Street was quiet and cold. Inside it was warm, and there was a woman on his couch reading a book with a broken spine, and his daughter was asleep upstairs, and his house felt less like a management problem than it had in 2 years. "Nora," he said. She looked up. He didn't have a sentence ready. He'd started with her name, and the sentence had not followed because he wasn't entirely sure what he was trying to say, which was unusual for him. He was generally a man who knew what he was going to say. She waited. She was good at waiting. She didn't fill silence with nervous sound. "I need you to know," he said carefully, "that this, whatever this is, isn't something I'm doing because I'm lonely, or because it's convenient that you live 3 doors away." He paused. "I've been lonely before, and I didn't do anything about it. And I've had convenient before, and I know what that feels like. This isn't that." She looked at him for a moment. The book was closed now, her thumb holding her place inside it. "What is it?" she asked. "I don't know exactly," he said, "but it's real. And I wanted you to know I know the difference." She was quiet. He watched something move across her face. Not a simple thing, not one emotion, but a complicated constellation of them, which was the honest response to an honest thing. "Okay," she said. "Okay. Okay." She opened her book again. "I believe you." He looked at her. "That's all you're going to say." "What did you want me to say?" "I don't know. Something." She looked up over the top of the page. "Ethan, I showed up to your house tonight after working a 10-hour day, and I'm sitting on your couch in my work socks, and I've been here for 3 hours. She held his gaze. "I think I'm already saying something." He looked at her work socks, which did, in fact, have a small hole at the left toe. "Yeah," he said. "Fair." She went back to her book. He watched the ocean documentary in silence and felt the particular weight of something settling, not resolved, not finished, not without its complications, but real, and held and chosen. Outside, both porch lights were on. His, on its timer. Hers, because she'd left it on from the inside. 3 houses apart, which was also, somehow, not very far at all. The last thing that happened in those early weeks was small, the way the things that matter most often are. It was a Sunday afternoon, the 3rd week of December, and Nora was helping Lily put up a paper chain she'd made at kindergarten. Loops of green and red construction paper, uneven in size, slightly lopsided in the way of things made by 5-year-old hands with safety scissors. They were taping it to the mantel when Ethan came in from the driveway. He stood in the living room doorway, coat still on. Lily was narrating something. Nora was listening. The paper chain went up, slightly crooked. Lily stepped back and assessed it with the critical eye of an artist evaluating her installation. "It's perfect," Lily declared. "It absolutely is," Nora agreed. Ethan looked at the two of them, at his daughter and this woman standing in the uneven winter light of his living room, with a crooked paper chain between them and complete satisfaction about it. He thought about the overflow table, about a woman listening to a string quartet, about everyone saw you choose me and the way she'd said it, naming a thing without asking for anything. He thought about how he'd chosen her in a room full of people and had not understood yet what that meant. He was beginning to understand now. Nora turned and saw him. She raised an eyebrow in the specific way that said, "How long have you been standing there without saying it?" "The chain is perfect," he said. "Extremely," she agreed. Lily grabbed his hand and pulled him toward the mantel to look at it up close, explaining each loop with the gravity of someone presenting important evidence. And he let himself be pulled. And over Lily's head he looked at Nora, and she looked back at him with that steady, unguarded look of hers. And neither of them said anything that needed to be said out loud. Some things were already being said in other ways. In soup left on the stove and work socks with a hole at the left toe and porch lights left on and a woman who showed up, repeatedly, without being asked, and stayed because she wanted to. It wasn't perfect. Nothing about this was neat or uncomplicated. She was cautious and he was guarded, and there was a gap between their lives that was real and would require real navigation. There were hard things still ahead that neither of them could see yet, but the paper chain was up. And for right now, in this particular Sunday afternoon light, that was enough. The paper chain stayed up through Christmas. Lily checked on it every morning, the way children check on things they've made. Not because they're worried it will disappear, but because they want the reassurance that something they built is still there. Ethan noticed this and said nothing about it, because there was nothing useful to say. Some things you just watch and file away and feel quietly about. Christmas itself was a careful negotiation, the way it always was now. Lily's mother, Claire, who lived 40 minutes away in a house that was tasteful and quiet, in the way of someone who had moved on and furnished accordingly, had Lily from Christmas Eve through the 26th. Ethan had her from the 26th through New Year's. This arrangement had been decided by mediators and signed by lawyers and was now simply the shape of his December, regular as weather. He spent Christmas Eve and Christmas Day doing what he'd learned to do on the days Lily wasn't there, which was work. Not because he wanted to, but because the alternative was sitting in a house that was too quiet and too tidy and too aware of its own emptiness. The London Fund required attention. A new acquisition in the Pacific Northwest was in its final due diligence phase. There were calls and documents and decisions that existed in every time zone simultaneously, and for 36 hours they were useful because they filled the space that Lily left. Nora spent Christmas with her sister in a town 2 hours east. She told him this the week before, standing at the mailbox in a light snow that hadn't decided whether to actually commit. And he'd said, "That's good, you'll have family time." And she'd said, "Yeah, my sister's kids are feral, but I love them." And that had been that. She was back on the 27th. He knew this because her truck reappeared in front of 41 on the evening of the 27th, and the porch light came on, and he stood at his kitchen window with coffee and noticed both of these things and then deliberately went back to work. He had Lily back on the 26th. She came home with a pink backpack full of presents from her mother's house, and a cold she'd picked up somewhere, and a very detailed account of everything she'd done, which she delivered nonstop for approximately 45 minutes. He listened to all of it. He made her soup. He put her in warm pajamas, the ones with the dinosaurs, because those were the only ones she wanted to wear right now, and he sat on the edge of her bed until she fell asleep mid-sentence, which happened more quickly than usual because of the cold. He went downstairs, poured himself something, stood at the window. The porch light at 41 was on. He picked up his phone and typed, "You're back." A minute passed. "You were watching for my truck." He almost denied it, then typed, "Yes." 3 dots. Then, "Come over. I have Christmas cookies my sister made. They're terrible, but there are a lot of them." He went over. The cookies were, as advertised, not good. They were the soft kind that had been decorated with icing in colors that didn't occur in nature, and Nora's sister had apparently put too much almond extract in the dough, which gave them a quality that Nora described charitably as ambitious. They ate 3 each, standing in her small kitchen, and he told her about Christmas alone, and she told him about her nieces and nephews, who ranged in age from 3 to 11, and who had apparently treated the holidays as an endurance sport. "The 3-year-old bit my elbow," she said. "Why?" "I genuinely don't know. She seemed satisfied about it afterward." "How's your elbow?" "Fine. It's 3. She set her cookie down. "How are you, actually?" He looked at her. He'd learned by now that she had 2 ways of asking how he was. The first was conversational, the check-in version. The second was the actual version, and the actual version had a specific weight on the word "actually" that signaled she was prepared to hear a real answer. "I'm better now," he said. He meant it plainly. She'd been gone 4 days, and he was better now that she was back, and he was done pretending that wasn't what was true. She looked at him for a moment. Then she nodded, once, slowly, accepting the fact of it. "Me too," she said. And January arrived with the particular coldness that felt personal, the kind that got into your bones and made everything slightly harder than it needed to be. Nora's renovation work slowed the way it always did in January, when contractors bid on jobs and waited and did smaller things in the meantime. She patched 2 walls on Mercer Avenue. She refinished a floor in a house on the north side of town for a couple who kept changing the stain color and then deciding they wanted the original one back. She replaced baseboards in a finished basement and drove an hour and a half each way and made enough to cover rent and not very much else. She didn't complain about this. Not to Ethan, not in the way of wanting something from him. She mentioned it the way you mention weather, factually, as context for other things. He paid attention anyway, not to fix it. Just because she mattered to him and things that were difficult for her were therefore things he wanted to understand. They had reached, without either of them making a formal declaration of it, the stage of something where the word they applied. Not announced, not labeled, just practiced, quietly, in the way that real things often developed. Not with ceremony, but with repetition, until one day the shape of something was simply there, and had been for a while. He brought her coffee on mornings when she had early jobs. She texted him when something funny happened at a job site, which happened more often than he'd expected, because apparently renovation work generated a particular category of absurd human behavior that she reported with dry precision. He showed up on her porch when his days had been long. She showed up at his kitchen when Lily asked for her, which was regularly, and when she asked for herself, which was also regularly. Lily had started calling her Nora in the tone children use for people who are simply fixtures, not with the formality of a new acquaintance, just the flat familiarity of someone who simply is, like Mrs. Donnelly, like the house on Carver Street, like the paper chain on the mantel. Ethan noticed this and felt 2 things simultaneously, a warmth that was almost frightening in its steadiness, and a low, persistent caution that lived just below it. He'd built his professional life on understanding risk, on knowing the difference between the kind of risk you took because the upside justified it and the kind you managed away because it had no floor. He knew how to be afraid of the right things in the right amounts. He did not know how to apply that to this. He was aware more than he let on that this was the most exposed he'd been in years, possibly since before the divorce, possibly before that. The letter arrived on a Tuesday in the 3rd week of January. He didn't know about it until Wednesday evening, when Nora showed up at his door later than usual, after 9, in her coat and her good boots, not work boots, the other ones, which he'd learned she wore when she'd been somewhere important, and she had an expression on her face that was doing a lot of containing. "Hey," he said. "Hey." She didn't come in immediately. She stood on the porch and looked at him. "Do you have a few minutes?" "I have as many minutes as you need." She came in. She took her coat off. She sat at the kitchen island, not in her usual spot, but in the end chair, which was slightly unusual, and he noticed it and waited. "I got a job offer," she said. She said it the way you say things you're not sure how to carry, flat at first, just to get the words out. He sat down across from her. "Tell me about it." "A construction management company based in Portland. They do mid to large-scale residential renovation. Upscale stuff, design forward. A colleague I worked with 5 years ago moved there, and they're expanding, and she put my name in." She paused. "It's a full-time position, 8-month contract initially with the possibility of permanent. They want someone with real hands-on experience, not just design background." "That sounds like exactly what you're good at," he said. "It is." She looked at her hands. "It's a real salary, consistent, benefits, housing stipend for the first 3 months while I find a place." She paused. "It's Portland, Ethan." He said nothing for a moment. "Portland," he repeated. "Oregon, not Maine." "I know which Portland." They looked at each other. "That's—" He stopped, chose his words carefully. "That's a real opportunity. It's the most financially stable thing anyone's offered me since I went independent." She wasn't looking at him now. She was looking at the counter. "Before I met you, before the wedding, before Carver Street, before any of this, I would have called her back the next morning and said yes." The before sat in the room. "What are you going to do?" he asked. "I don't know." She looked up. "I haven't told you about this to get you to tell me what to do. I want to be clear about that." "I know." "I'm telling you because—" She pressed her lips together. "Because not telling you felt wrong, and because I need to figure out what I actually want, and I can't do that while I'm keeping this from you. He looked at her across the kitchen island. His kitchen island, which she now knew better than her own. His kitchen, where she'd eaten scrambled eggs the first time, and pasta that was too soft and soup he hadn't made, and rice and beans she'd brought from her own small refrigerator. When do they need an answer? He asked. 2 weeks. Okay. Okay? I mean, he ran a hand through his hair, something he did when he was moving carefully through difficult terrain. I mean, okay as in I hear you, not okay as in this is simple. Nothing about this is simple, she said. No. She was quiet for a moment, then, are you going to try to talk me out of it? He looked at her steadily. No. Why not? Because it's not my call. He said it with some effort, not because he didn't believe it, but because the part of him that did not want her to go was working hard underneath the part that knew the right thing to say. And because the reason this matters to me is that you're someone who makes her own choices. I'm not going to be the thing that makes a choice harder than it already is. She looked at him for a long time. That's a very careful answer, she said. It's the true one. It's also not the whole thing. She tilted her head. What are you not saying? He thought about the right way to be honest here without making it about him. He did not entirely succeed. I don't want you to go, he said, quiet, direct. That's what I'm not saying. I don't want you to go, and I'm not going to say it like it should be a factor in what you decide because it shouldn't be the primary one. But you asked. She nodded slowly. She did not say anything for a moment. Thank you for telling me, she said finally. He drove her home. 3 houses. He drove her anyway because it was late and cold, and she'd come in her good boots, and he felt the need to do something small, and he couldn't think of anything better. She let him, which was its own kind of telling. She didn't say goodnight in any particular way, just got out of the car, boots on the cold pavement, and went inside. The porch light was already on. He sat in his driveway for a while. The 2 weeks that followed were the most careful of the months they'd known each other. They continued to see each other. Dinners. Porch evenings. Lily demanded a second paper chain for the living room, and they helped make it and put it up, which felt both normal and strange because the whole time Ethan was aware that normal was provisional in a way it hadn't been before. He did not raise the offer. He had said what he'd said, and he meant it. It was her decision, not his, and pressuring her would be both wrong and counterproductive, and would also, he suspected, be the kind of thing that told her something unflattering about him. She raised it once, toward the end of the first week, on his porch in the cold. I keep making lists, she said. What kind of lists? Pros and cons? Portland pros, steady money, real opportunity, something new. Portland cons. She paused. The cons column keeps changing. What's in it today? She didn't answer immediately. She held her mug with both hands. Lily's face when she sees something she thinks is funny. The way your kitchen smells on the mornings you make coffee before I get there. The 3 guys at the hardware store on 5th who know my name. The fact that I can see my porch light from your driveway. She paused. The fact that you don't talk me out of things. He looked at her. That last one's on the cons list? He said. Yes. Why? Because it means I trust you, she said. And I didn't plan to trust someone this much again. It's inconvenient. He almost smiled at that. Sorry. You're not. No, he admitted. I'm not. She looked out at the street. The money would change things for me, Ethan, in real concrete ways. I could stop lying awake in January thinking about whether I'll have enough work in February. She stopped. I could stop borrowing against next month. I know, he said. You could fix that. She said it carefully, knowing exactly what she was stepping near. Not even on purpose. Just by existing in my life more fully, you could make that problem go away, and that's exactly the problem. He understood her immediately. It was the thing that had been underneath everything from the beginning, the gap, the asymmetry, the way that being close to him offered a kind of relief from hardship that had nothing to do with love and everything to do with arithmetic. And she would not let herself accept relief she hadn't earned. She'd told him as much in various ways from the first week. The gutters, the contractor offer, the refusal of small conveniences. You think accepting that would change how you feel, he said, or how you know what you feel. I think it would change how I could trust what I feel, she said, and I'm not willing to not trust what I feel. Not again. She looked at him. If I stay, I need it to be because I chose this, specifically this, not because staying is easy or comfortable or taken care of. And if you go, then I find out what I want when I'm standing on my own in a new city with a real job and no one looking out for me. She said it evenly, and maybe I find out it's this anyway, but at least I'll know it's true. He was quiet for a long time. I hear you, he said. I know you do. She looked at him. That's also on the cons list. He did not sleep well that week. This was not unusual for him, but the reason was different. Usually insomnia came from problems that had solutions, numbers that weren't right, decisions that needed more information, timelines that required revision. Those were workable problems. He had systems for them. This was not a workable problem. This was the particular kind of situation where you had made every right move and were still sitting with uncertainty, because another person's choice was exactly that, theirs, and not subject to management. He lay awake and was honest with himself about what he wanted. He wanted her to stay. He wanted her on the porch at 41 with the light on and at his kitchen island and on his couch with her broken-spined books and in Lily's life in the specific way she'd come to occupy it, which was quietly and fully and in a way that Lily had never asked for in words but had leaned into with everything she had. He also wanted her to make a choice that she could stand behind in 10 years. That was the kind of wanting that was harder and more important and required him to hold the other kind of wanting at a distance from it. He was better at this than most people. He'd had to be. On the Thursday of the second week, 8 days into the 2 weeks, Nora came over late. This was not unusual by now, but something was different about the way she knocked. 3 quick ones. The way you knock when you're holding something in and trying to get to the door before you change your mind. He opened it. She was in her regular clothes. Not the good boots. She was wearing the work sweater with the hole at the collar and her hair was down, which it rarely was. And she looked like someone who had been sitting alone for hours and had finally run out of sitting alone. I turned it down, she said. He looked at her. She came inside. She didn't take her shoes off immediately the way she usually did. She just stood in the front hallway with her arms slightly crossed. Not defensively, but like she was holding herself together while she figured out what else she needed to say. Nora, I called her this afternoon, she said. My friend in Portland. I told her I was declining. What did she say? She said she understood, and she was sorry, and she hoped I was sure. A short exhale. She was kind about it. He was careful. Are you sure? She looked at him. No, I'm not completely sure. I don't think I will be for a while, and that's just what it is. She pressed her hands together in front of her. But here's what I kept coming back to. Every time I made the pros column longer and the cons column shorter. She paused. The job in Portland is a good opportunity for a version of my life where this doesn't exist. And I tried to imagine that version of my life, and She stopped. Tried again. I couldn't find a version of my life where the money was more important than the thing that's actually real here. He stepped toward her, not dramatically, just the space between them, which was small, closing. It's not about what you can give me, she said, and he could see the effort in it, the need to make this clear before anything else. I need you to know that. I could make money work. I always have. It's not about that. I know, he said. I don't want you to think I stayed because it was easier. I don't think that. Because it wasn't. It was actually harder. Her voice caught slightly on the last word, just a fraction, and she pressed past it. It's harder to stay and be uncertain and not know how this turns out than it would have been to go and have a salary and a plan. I know, he said again. Softer this time. She looked at him. This close, he could see that she'd been crying, not recently but earlier, the specific kind of faint redness around the eyes that was already fading. I'm not asking you to promise me anything, she said. I want to be clear about that. I turned down a job, not asked for a guarantee. I'm standing here and I chose this and I needed you to know that's what I did. He reached out and took her hand, just that. Her hand which was cold again the way it always was, from the outside air or from nerves or from just being her. Thank you, he said, for telling me. and for the way you chose it." She looked at their hands, turned hers slightly to hold his better. "I'm still scared," she said. "Me too," he said. This seemed to surprise her. She looked up. "You?" she said. "What exactly do you think has been happening on my end for the last 2 weeks?" he said. "I've been terrified." She stared at him for a moment. Then something in her face shifted. Not relief exactly, but the specific recognition of someone who has been carrying something alone and discovers that the other person has been carrying the same thing on their side of the distance. "You didn't say anything," she said. "You needed to decide without me saying anything." She looked at him for a long moment. "I don't know what to do with you," she said. "That makes two of us," he said. She laughed. It came out a little wet and a little tired and entirely real, the kind of laugh that lives right next to crying and often follows it. She leaned forward and put her head against his chest for a moment, not dramatically, not collapsing into him, just resting, the way you rest something you've been holding too long. His arms came around her. They stood in the hallway of number 38 for a while, not saying anything, the house quiet around them, Lily asleep upstairs, the porch light on outside. He didn't say it was going to be fine. He didn't know that. She didn't say she was certain. She'd already told him she wasn't. They just stood there in the ordinary hallway, two people who were scared and real and had chosen each other anyway, and that was enough to stand on. The next morning, Lily came downstairs and found them both at the kitchen island. Ethan was making coffee. Nora was eating toast she'd made herself because by now she knew where the bread was and didn't ask. Lily looked at this arrangement for approximately 3 seconds. "Is Nora staying for breakfast?" she said. "She's already eating breakfast," Ethan said. Lily looked at Nora's toast, then at Ethan, then back at Nora with the expression of someone arriving at a conclusion. "Can I have toast too?" "Yes," Nora said. "Do you want jam?" "The strawberry one," Lily said, climbing onto her stool. "The other one tastes like socks." "Valid," Nora said. Ethan made 3 coffees, 2 real ones, one that was mostly milk and a small amount of coffee because Lily had recently decided she was old enough for coffee and they had compromised on this arrangement. And the 3 of them had breakfast in the ordinary, imperfect, slightly crowded kitchen on Carver Street. The paper chain was on the mantel in the next room. Lily had added 3 new loops the previous week in yellow and purple, which she said were for spring even though spring was months away. The chain was uneven and too long on one side, and the tape was starting to peel on the left end. Nobody fixed it. It was fine exactly as it was. What? The weeks after Nora turned down the Portland offer were quieter in the way of something that has been resolved. Not without tension entirely. She still had hard January weeks with thin work, and Ethan still had days when the professional version of himself came home so hollowed out that he was barely useful company. These things didn't disappear. They were just the landscape now, known and navigated rather than hidden. February came. The street got a snow that actually stuck, 2 inches that Lily treated as a major weather event and wanted to document thoroughly. Nora helped her build something in the front yard that started as a snowman and evolved into what Lily called a snow dinosaur, which looked like neither thing but about which Lily was completely serious. Ethan stood on the porch and watched them. There was a moment, with Nora's hands helping to press the snow into a shape that Lily kept revising, their breath coming out in small clouds, Lily's voice rising with the urgency of someone who has a very specific creative vision, when Ethan thought, this is the thing, not the career, not the fund, not the careful reconstruction of himself after the divorce. This ordinary cold February front yard moment with misshapen snow and a woman who had turned down a good job because what was real here was better than what was safe there. He didn't say any of this. He just stood on the porch in the February cold and held the cup of coffee he'd brought out and let the moment be what it was. Later, inside, while Lily changed out of her wet snow things, Nora came into the kitchen and looked at him and said, "You were watching us." "I was," he said. She studied him. "What were you thinking about?" He thought about telling her. He thought about the right way to say, this is the thing without it coming out as something performative or too large for an ordinary Tuesday. "I was thinking," he said, "that I'm glad you stayed." She held his gaze for a moment. "Me too," she said. She got a glass of water. He refilled his coffee. From the hallway came the sound of Lily arguing with her own snow boots about whether they were wet enough to require the special drying place near the heater, a monologue that required no participation from either adult. The kitchen was warm. Outside, the snow dinosaur stood in the front yard, lopsided and committed. Some choices look small on the day you make them. Some of them aren't. The snow dinosaur lasted 4 days before an afternoon thaw reduced it to something that Lily described, with deep philosophical acceptance, as a snow puddle that used to be something. She said this while looking at the front yard with her hands on her hips, in the specific stance she'd developed for confronting life's disappointments, and then she went inside and asked for hot chocolate. And that was that. February moved into March the way it always did in that part of the country, reluctantly, with several false starts. There would be a week of warmth that made people believe in things, and then a hard frost that reminded them not to. The geraniums in the window boxes of number 38 survived because Mrs. Donnelly was vigilant about them, bringing them inside when the temperature dropped, returning them to their boxes on the better days. Lily had taken an interest in this process and was now deeply invested in the geranium's welfare in a way that Ethan found both endearing and slightly exhausting, because it meant he had to remember which days were geranium days. Nora's work picked up in March, the way it always did when weather broke, and people remembered the projects they'd deferred through winter. She had 3 jobs running in loose overlap: a bathroom on the east side, a porch repair 2 streets over, a full kitchen reno for a couple in their 60s who had very clear ideas about what they wanted, and the patience to wait until they got it. She liked this couple. She mentioned them occasionally, in the way she mentioned things she genuinely enjoyed. Briefly, without decoration, just noting that they brought her lunch on Tuesdays and had been married 38 years and still argued about where to put the spice rack. "They've been arguing about the spice rack for 3 weeks, she told Ethan one evening. Same argument, every day. She wants it near the stove. He says near the stove means the heat gets into the spices." "Who's right?" Ethan asked. "He is, technically. Heat does affect spices." She turned her mug in her hands. "But she's the one who cooks, so she should get to decide." "Did you tell them that?" "I told them I was a flooring specialist and the spice rack was above my pay grade." She paused. "Then I told them I'd install it wherever they wanted, and if they decided to move it later, I'd make that happen too." Very diplomatic. "I've been practicing," she said, with a look that was directed at him specifically, and he accepted that. The thing between them had a different quality now. Since the night she'd come to his door and told him she'd turned down Portland, since they'd stood in the hallway and held each other without making speeches about it, something had settled. Not completely. There were still the complications, still the gap between their circumstances that required navigation, still the things they didn't say because they weren't ready to say them. But underneath those things was something solid now. A foundation, even if neither of them used that word. Ethan's daughter felt it. Lily processed the world through a 5-year-old's direct sensory experience of it, which meant she did not have opinions about relationships in the abstract, but she had very clear feelings about specific facts. Nora was here a lot, and Nora was good, and Professor Waffles approved of her. And these things were simply true, the way the geraniums were true, and the dinosaur pajamas were true, and the sleepy orange lamp was true. Claire, Lily's mother, knew about Nora by now. Ethan had told her briefly during a custody exchange in late January because he believed in the principle of no surprises. Claire had listened, assessed the information with the practical efficiency of someone who had rebuilt her own life and had no interest in complicating his, and said, "Is she good with Lily?" And he said yes, and she said, "Okay then," and they'd moved on to the logistics of an upcoming school event. It wasn't warmth exactly, what existed between Ethan and his ex-wife. It was a working relationship, carefully maintained, built on the agreement that Lily was the priority, and everything else was secondary. They were better at being co-parents than they'd been at being married. He accepted this as the particular shape of that particular failure and didn't spend much time wishing it were different. What he spent time thinking about was Nora. He did this without always meaning to. In the middle of calls, during long flights, in the specific quiet after Lily was in bed, when the house settled into itself, and he would find himself standing at the kitchen window or checking his phone for a text or simply being aware of the light at number 41, the way you're aware of something that has become necessary. He was not, by nature, a man who said things before he was certain of them. He'd built his professional reputation partly on this quality, the ability to hold a position under pressure until the information justified moving. He tried to apply the same principle here. He did not rush toward declarations. He did not pressure her. He moved at the pace the thing required, which was slower than he sometimes wanted and probably exactly right. The neighborhood, for its part, was paying attention. Carver Street had the particular social ecosystem of a block that had been inhabited long enough for people to know each other's business without always meaning to. There was Donna Reyes at number 44, who retired early and tended her garden with the dedication of a second career and missed very little of what happened on the street. There was the Kowalski family at number 35, who had 3 teenagers and a dog named Biscuit, who visited everyone's yard without permission. There was Frank Alderman at number 43, who was 72 and had lived on the street longer than anyone and considered this a form of authority. These people, and the others between them, had noticed the pattern of Nora's truck and Ethan's porch light and the specific frequency with which the woman from 41 was visible through the windows of 38. They had opinions about this, which were exchanged at mailboxes and across fence lines and in the parking lot of the grocery store 2 blocks away. The opinions varied in their specifics but were broadly consistent in their direction. Something was happening between the man in the big house and the quiet woman down the street, and this was interesting, and it was only a matter of time before someone asked. The someone turned out to be Donna Reyes, and the occasion turned out to be the Kowalski barbecue. The Kowalski family held a barbecue every year in late April, which had become a neighborhood institution less by design than by the sheer force of their hospitality and the quality of their ribs. It was the kind of neighborhood event that people attended with vague intentions and stayed at until the food ran out, which was usually around 8:30. Kids ran through the yard. Biscuit was tied to the fence with a leash long enough that he remained technically compliant while actually being able to reach most of the food on the lower tables. Nora had been to this barbecue twice before. She knew the Kowalskis the way you know neighbors, by name and wave and occasional conversation, enough to be comfortable, not enough to be intimate. She wore jeans and a soft green top that Ethan had never seen on her before, and her hair was down, and she looked like someone who had decided to show up as herself and leave it at that. Ethan arrived separately. He'd been on a call that ran late, London again, always London when he had somewhere to be, and came down the street still in his work clothes, no tie, collar open, which was as close to casual as he got on work days. He spotted her near the drinks table before he spotted anyone else, which he suspected said something about him, and which he did not examine too carefully. He made his way over. "You're late," she said, handing him a drink before he asked for one. "I'm always late." "You're always late to things that aren't professional obligations," she corrected. "You're 15 minutes early to everything, that is." He looked at her. "You've been paying attention." "I live 3 doors away," she said, "and I have eyes." They were standing close together in the particular way of 2 people who have stopped monitoring the distance between them. Not pressed together, but not the careful social distance of acquaintance either. The kind of closeness that happens when you've stopped thinking about it. This did not go unnoticed. Donna Reyes arrived at their corner of the table at the casual, circuitous way of someone who has been making her way toward you for 5 minutes and doesn't want it to look intentional. She was 61 and sharp-eyed, and had the social energy of someone who genuinely liked people, which made her much easier to handle than the version of this who didn't. "Nora," she said warmly, "I feel like I haven't talked to you since the fall." "The last barbecue," Nora agreed. "Your dahlias look incredible, by the way. I've been seeing them from the street. They're the one thing I actually get right." Donna accepted this compliment with practiced deflection and then turned unhurriedly to Ethan. "Ethan, you look less stressed than you did at Christmas." "I feel less stressed," he said, which was true. Donna looked between them. Not obviously. She was too good at this to be obvious, but she looked between them in the way of someone checking something she already thought she knew. "You 2 have been spending time together," she said. It was not a question. Nora did not flinch or deflect. He'd noticed this about her. She didn't perform innocence when she wasn't innocent, and she didn't shrink under directness. "We have," she said. "Good," Donna said, with a satisfaction that suggested she'd been waiting for this confirmation for a while. "I've thought for months there was something there. I mentioned it to Frank." "I'm sure Frank had opinions," Ethan said. "Frank thinks everything on this street is his business," Donna said, which is usually annoying but occasionally useful. She looked at them both again, this time with a warmth that was genuine enough to not be intrusive. "Well, it's nice. You should know the street is rooting for you, in its nosy way." "That's terrifying," Nora said. "It should be," Donna agreed cheerfully, and moved away to refill her drink. Nora looked at Ethan. He looked back at her. "The street is rooting for us," she said, "in its nosy way. Frank has opinions." "Frank always has opinions." She shook her head slowly, but the corner of her mouth was doing something. "This is going to be interesting." "It's going to be fine," he said. He thought about it. "Probably fine." "That is a very specific level of confidence," she said. Frank Alderman appeared about 20 minutes later, with the unhurried certainty of a man who had attended enough neighborhood events to know that there was no urgency in conversation, because the conversation was going to happen regardless. He was 72, white-haired, with the handshake of someone who'd done physical work for most of his life and the eyes of someone who'd been watching people for all of it. He'd told Ethan once, early on when Ethan first moved to the street, that he'd lived on Carver since 1987 and had seen a lot of people come and go, and that the ones who stayed were the ones who understood what the street actually was, which was not just an address but a community, and that communities required participation. Ethan had found this both slightly presumptuous and entirely correct. Frank shook Ethan's hand, nodded at Nora, took a rib from a passing plate without asking. "I heard Donna already got to you," he said. "She did," Ethan said. "She's fast." He said it without rancor. "Good. Saves me the setup." He looked at Nora directly. "You're good for him." Nora blinked. "Excuse me?" "I've watched this man come home from work for 2 years," Frank said in the tone of someone presenting evidence. "For most of those 2 years, he looked like he was carrying the building on his back. Last few months, he doesn't. That's you." He bit into the rib. "I just wanted to say so." Nora looked at him for a moment. "Thank you, Frank." "Don't thank me. I'm not doing anything." He glanced at Ethan. "She's straightforward. I like that." "So do I," Ethan said. Frank nodded, filed this away, and wandered off toward the end of the table where the cornbread was, his participation in the conversation apparently complete. Nora watched him go. He just said his piece and left. "That's Frank. I respect that enormously," she said. Lily appeared from behind the house in the company of the 2 youngest Kowalski teenagers, who had been recruited, apparently, as dinosaur research consultants. She was carrying a stick that she was using as a pointer and explaining something with considerable authority. She spotted her father and Nora and detoured toward them with the efficiency of a child who has information to share. "Madison says her favorite dinosaur is the velociraptor, but she is wrong, because the velociraptor was actually small and not like the movie," Lily announced. "The movie took creative liberties," Nora said seriously. "I told her that," Lily said. "What are creative liberties?" "It means they changed it to make it more exciting," Ethan said. Lily considered this. "That seems dishonest." "That's movies," Nora said. Lily accepted this with the philosophical resignation of someone filing it under disappointing things about the world and ran back toward Madison, stick in hand, continuing the argument. Ethan watched her go. "She's going to be exhausting in a completely wonderful way," Nora said. "She already is." Nora was quiet for a moment. Then, "Does she know? About us?" He looked at her. "She knows you're important. She doesn't have a label for it." "Should she?" He thought about this. It was a real question, not a rhetorical one. Nora asked real questions and wanted real answers, and he'd stopped giving her the comfortable version of things a while ago. "I think she knows what she needs to know," he said. "She knows you're here. She knows I want you to be here. She knows you're not going anywhere." A pause. "Are you?" Nora looked at him with an expression that was almost amused. "I turned down a job in Portland for this," she said. "I think that answers the question." "I like hearing it anyway," he said. She looked at him for a moment. Then she did something she didn't do often in public. She reached over and took his hand. Not a performance of it, just took it, held it. They stood that way for a while, watching the barbecue, watching Lily argue about velociraptors, listening to Biscuit's optimistic barking from the fence. It was not a grand moment. It was a Tuesday afternoon level moment at a neighborhood event with paper plates and a dog on a long leash. And it was, undeniably, one of the better moments either of them had experienced in recent memory. Check. They left the barbecue together, which was itself a statement, and walked back down Carver Street in the late afternoon light that turned everything a specific gold. Lily was ahead of them, still carrying the stick, narrating something to herself about velociraptors and creative liberties. Nora's hand was still in his. He was aware, walking down this street that he'd walked down hundreds of times, that it looked different with her beside him. Not because the street had changed, just because the thing you're carrying when you walk somewhere changes the experience of walking there. He'd walked this street tired and alone and professionally successful in ways that didn't reach the right parts of him. And he'd walked it worried about Lily and worried about the fund and worried about the specific shape of a life that didn't quite fit. Now he walked it with Nora's hand in his and Lily's voice ahead of them and the late April light on the geraniums in his window boxes. Same street, different walk. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Yes." "That night at the wedding, at table 9. He paused. "When you said everyone saw me choose you, what did you mean by that exactly?" She was quiet for a moment. "I meant what I said. There were women in that room who would have expected you to ask them, women who thought they were more appropriate." "That's not what I'm asking," he said. "I'm asking what it meant to you. When I asked you." She looked ahead at Lily for a moment, then at the street, then at him. "It meant I wasn't invisible," she said. Simply. "That's all." She paused. "I'd spent a long time being overlooked. Not dramatically, just in the way that happens when you're not. When you're not the person in the room with the obvious thing to offer. And you walked up to that table when you didn't have to, and you asked me." She was looking at their joined hands. "It didn't mean anything yet, but it meant I wasn't invisible." He let that sit. "You're not invisible," he said. "I know," she said. "Now." They reached number 38, the front door, the geraniums in their boxes, some of them newly returned after a cold night's shelter. Lily ran up the porch steps and stopped at the top, turned around, and looked at them both with the level evaluation of a 5-year-old arriving at a decision. "Is Nora staying for dinner?" she asked. "That's up to Nora," Ethan said. Lily looked at Nora with the directness of someone who doesn't believe in unnecessary uncertainty. "Do you want to stay for dinner?" Nora looked up at her on the top step, at the small, opinionated, dinosaur-committed child who had decided without fanfare that Nora belonged in the landscape of her life. "Yeah," Nora said. "I do." Lily nodded, satisfied, and went inside. Suot. After dinner, pasta again, slightly better this time, Lily still noted that it could be more al dente, but said it with less conviction than before, which was progress. After Lily was in bed and the kitchen was cleaned and the house was quiet, Ethan found something he'd been thinking about for a few days. It was a small Bluetooth speaker. He'd ordered it without thinking too hard about why, which was a sign that the thinking had already happened somewhere below the level of deliberate thought. He put it on the kitchen counter. Nora was at the island, holding a cup of tea, watching him. "What are you doing?" she said. "1 second," he said. He found the song on his phone. He knew the name of it now. He'd looked it up after the wedding and then not done anything with the information for 4 months. The orchestral one. The slow one that had been playing when he'd extended his hand at table 9 and she'd taken it and they'd found a cautious rhythm that started as courtesy and became something else. He pressed play. It came through the speaker soft and clear, the same strings, the same slow tempo. The kitchen was smaller than a ballroom and there was no dance floor, and the lights were ordinary overhead kitchen lights, not wedding lighting, and there were no 200 people watching. Nora looked at the speaker, then at him. "Ethan," she said, "I know what you're going to say." "I'm going to say this is very sentimental," he said. "Yes, I know." She looked at him for a moment with an expression that was trying to be skeptical and not quite getting there. This is the wedding song. It is. You found it. 4 months ago, he admitted. I've been thinking about the right time. She set her mug down. And the right time is a Tuesday night in your kitchen? The right time, he said, is when there's no one watching, when there's nothing to perform and nowhere to be, and it's just this. He held out his hand. Because the first time I did this, I was doing it partly to help with an awkward situation, and I've wanted to do it again when that wasn't the reason. She looked at his hand, then she got off the stool. She took his hand and he put his other hand on her waist, and she put hers on his shoulder, and they moved slowly in the kitchen, on the tile floor with the slightly uneven grout that she'd noticed 4 months ago and had mentioned once in passing because she couldn't help noticing things like that. The song was the same song. The rhythm was the same rhythm. They were different. They were better at it now. Not technically. Neither of them had improved as dancers. But they were better at the part underneath dancing, which was being present. Being willing to let something be what it was without managing it or reducing it to something safer. I chose you that first night, she said, quietly, near the middle of the song. She was looking at something over his shoulder, not in a distracted way, but in the way you look at something when you're saying something true, and you need the slight distance to say it clearly. I know I didn't say it that way, but I did. When you held out your hand at table 9, I chose you. He pulled back slightly to look at her face. She met his eyes. I thought you were just being polite, she said, but I chose you anyway. Because you sat down next to me and talked to me like I was a person worth talking to, and you didn't make a thing out of the table or the people in the room who were watching, and when you held out your hand, you looked. She paused, slightly nervous. I was slightly nervous, he said. I know. A small, real smile. It helped. He thought about table 9, the overflow table, the woman with her hands folded around a glass of water, listening to a string quartet like it actually meant something. The way she'd said, I'm not good at things that seem like one thing and turn out to be another on his front doorstep the morning after she'd first come for breakfast, clear as a bell, giving him the honest map of herself before he'd even thought to ask for one. You've been the most honest person in my life for 4 months, he said. She looked at him. I don't mean you tell me everything, he said. I mean what you do say you mean. You don't manage me. You don't perform things. You just say what's real. He looked at her face, which was close. That's not a small thing. For me, specifically, it's not a small thing. She was quiet for a moment. The song was near its end. The strings were doing the slight upward thing that meant the piece was resolving. You make it easy, she said. To be honest, she paused. Most people don't make it easy. You ask the right questions and then you actually wait for the answer. I'm learning from you, he said. She shook her head slightly. You already knew how. You just needed someone to be honest back at you. The song ended. They stood still for a moment in the kitchen, her hand still in his still at her waist. We should probably, she started. Yeah, he said. Neither of them moved. She laughed, soft and quiet. The laugh he'd come to recognize as the one that meant she was exactly where she wanted to be and was slightly surprised by it. Ethan, she said. Yeah. I need you to know something. She looked up at him steadily. I stayed because this is real. Not because it's safe or comfortable or because you could make things easier. I want to be able to say, 10 years from now, that I knew what I was choosing and why. Her hand, which had been on his shoulder, moved slightly. I know what I'm choosing. He held her gaze. So do I. She nodded. Once, the way she nodded when something was decided. She went up on her toes. She was a few inches shorter than him, a thing he'd cataloged sometime in those early weeks, and kissed him. Not a first kiss. It was a later kiss, the kind you give when the first has already happened in some important sense, when it's been waiting to be made literal by two people who were careful and then stopped being careful enough to let this be what it was. He kissed her back. The speaker had gone quiet. The kitchen was just a kitchen. The tile floor was slightly uneven. The overhead lights were the wrong kind for romance, and neither of them noticed. When they separated, she stayed close for a moment. The street is going to be unbearable about this, she said. Frank already told me you're good for me, he said, Frank did not waste any time. Frank is 72 and has no patience for people who take too long to say things they already know. She leaned back slightly to look at him. Do you think he's right? About you being good for me? Yeah. He thought about the January nights when she'd appeared at his door after his long days and brought rice and beans and tea with too much milk. About Lily's breathing when Nora read to her. About the conversation on the porch where she'd said, I don't trust my own read on it yet, and he'd said that's fair instead of don't worry about it, and how much that had mattered. About the Portland letter and the 2 weeks and the night she'd stood in his hallway and said I turned it down, steady-voiced and scared and sure. Yeah, he said. He's right. She nodded again, stepped back, picked up her mug of tea, which had gone cold, and finished it anyway. Okay, she said. Okay, he agreed. She got her jacket. He walked her to the door. Outside, the street was quiet and April cold, with the particular smell of spring that hadn't quite arrived yet, but was coming. Number 41 had its porch light on. I'll see you tomorrow, she said. Not a question. Yeah, he said. She walked down the porch steps and down the street, and he watched her until she was at her door, the way he'd watched since those first November mornings, the way that had stopped being casual a long time ago. She went inside. Her porch light stayed on. He went back into his own house. The kitchen still smelled faintly of dinner, and the speaker was still on the counter and the song was in the room somehow, the way music stays in a room after it stops. He cleaned up the last of the dishes, checked on Lily, who was asleep with one arm thrown over Professor Waffles and her mouth slightly open, exactly as always. Stood in the doorway long enough to feel the particular gratitude that came from seeing her like this, safe and small and completely herself. He went to his study. He had emails. He had the Pacific Northwest acquisition in its final stage. He had 14 things that required his attention and were not going anywhere. He sat down at his desk. He thought about what Nora had said. I know what I'm choosing, not as reassurance, as a fact. A flat, clear, self-aware statement from a woman who had worked 11 years with her hands and knew the difference between what she wanted and what she could settle for. He thought about how he'd met her at an overflow table and she'd been listening to music like it mattered, and how that had told him something he didn't have language for at the time and was only now beginning to articulate. He thought about Donna Reyes and Frank Alderman and the nosy, invested, occasionally exhausting neighborhood that had apparently been watching all of this unfold and had formed opinions, and how that was both ridiculous and, in its way, exactly what a street was for. He thought about a song playing in a kitchen on a Tuesday night. He opened his emails, but for a few minutes before he began working, he sat in his leather chair in his study and let himself have the thing he'd been careful about letting himself have for 4 months, which was the simple, unreasonable, entirely real feeling of being someone whose life had turned in one particular direction in a way that felt right. It wasn't resolved. Nothing was wrapped up or guaranteed. Nora would have hard months with work. He would have long stretches of being consumed by things she couldn't always be part of. There were real things between them that would take time and navigation and the willingness to keep choosing each other on the days when it was harder. But she knew what she was choosing, and so did he. He picked up his pen. Outside on Carver Street, 2 porch lights were on. Spring became summer the way things become themselves when you stop watching. Gradually, then all at once. The geraniums in the window boxes of number 38 went from cautious to extravagant. Lily's school year ended with a ceremony that involved construction paper diplomas and a song about growing, which Ethan recorded on his phone while Nora stood beside him and pretended not to find it as moving as she did, and which he watched 3 more times that evening after Lily was in bed. The summer had its own rhythms. Nora's work expanded in the heat. Decks, patios, outdoor spaces that people had been deferring until the weather made them urgent. She was busy in a good way, the solvent kind of busy that meant she stopped lying awake in the specific January anxiety of will there be enough, and this change was not dramatic, but it was real, and Ethan watched it in her without commenting on it, because she wouldn't have wanted the comment. What she wanted was exactly what she had, work she was good at, steadily, on her own terms. He had his own complicated summer. The Pacific Northwest acquisition closed in June, which should have been a clean win and mostly was, except that the transition period required more of him than projected. And there were 3 weeks in July when he was operating on 5 hours of sleep, and Jordan was sending triage emails at midnight. And Lily asked him once, with the uncanny accuracy of children, "Daddy, are you tired or are you sad?" And he'd had to think about that for a moment before answering that he was tired but not sad, which was true and also different from what July had looked like in the previous 2 years. The difference was Nora. Not because she solved things. She didn't. She was not a woman who appeared and made hard months easy. She was a woman who sat with you in the hard month and said true things, and sometimes brought food, and sometimes just read on the couch while he worked and did not require him to perform okayness when he wasn't okay. That was the difference, and it was not small. By August, they had settled into something that the street recognized and accepted and occasionally commented on with varying degrees of tact. Donna Reyes mentioned once, over the fence, that they made sense together. Frank Alderman said nothing further on the subject, having said what he intended to say in April, and considering his position established. The Kowalski teenagers had, somewhere along the way, started including Nora in the category of Carver Street adults who were allowed to tell them to get biscuit off someone else's lawn, which was its own form of community acceptance. Claire, during a custody exchange in late July, told Ethan that Lily talked about Nora constantly. She said it without edge, just as information. He said he knew. She said that was good, and she meant it, and he believed her, and they moved on to the schedule for August, and that was the whole conversation. Lily herself did not talk about what Nora was or wasn't. She simply acted as though the question didn't need answering, which was the most complete answer available. She showed Nora things, her drawings, the rock collection she'd started in the backyard, the library books that were technically overdue, but which she wasn't ready to return because she was still living inside them. She demanded Nora's opinion on things with the frankness of someone who trusted that the opinion would be real, and Nora gave real opinions, and Lily took them seriously, and this was their relationship, unannounced and complete. In September, 2 things happened that mattered. The first was that Nora got a call about a contract, a substantial one, a full renovation project for a property management company that was upgrading 6 units in a building on the west side. It was 8 weeks of guaranteed work, at a rate that made her sit down when she saw the number. She told Ethan about it in his kitchen, standing at the counter, and her voice had a quality he recognized now as the particular flatness she used when she was containing something large. "It's real money," she said. "It is," he agreed. "Like, actually different." She looked at the counter, like I could fix my truck without thinking about it for 6 weeks first. He knew enough about her finances to know that her truck needed things she'd been deferring since winter. She'd mentioned it twice without asking for anything, just as context, which was how she mentioned most of the things in her life that were difficult. "Are you going to take it?" he said. She looked at him like this was not the question she'd expected. "Of course I'm going to take it. I'm telling you because I'm happy." He looked at her. She met his eyes, and there it was. The thing she sometimes still seemed surprised by, that she could be happy on her own terms. That the good thing in her life right now wasn't contingent on him or his resources or the proximity of his world to hers. She had earned this contract. It had nothing to do with number 38 or the man in it. "Good," he said. He meant it fully. She smiled. The real one. The one that appeared before she decided whether to let it. "You know what this means?" "What?" "I can clean my own gutters," she said. He laughed, genuinely the kind that surprised him out of his chest. She laughed too, and it went through the kitchen the way her laughs always went through rooms, like something opening. The second thing that happened in September was that Ethan took Lily to the park on a Saturday afternoon, and she said, while they were on the swings, without preamble, "Is Nora going to live with us?" He stopped pumping his legs. The swing slowed. Lily was still going, feet pointed at the sky, entirely unconcerned with the weight of what she'd just asked. "What made you think about that?" he said. "Madison's mom lives with her boyfriend now," Lily said, "and he helps make dinner sometimes." She considered. "His dinners are not as good as Nora's rice thing. The rice and beans. That one." She slowed her swing. "So is she?" He thought about how to answer this honestly without making it too large for the swing set at 3 in the afternoon. I don't know yet, he said. We haven't talked about that. Maybe you should talk about it, Lily said, with the breezy authority of a 5-year-old who has identified a gap in adult decision-making. Maybe we should, he said. Lily resumed swinging. He sat on his swing and thought about it for the rest of the afternoon. Chaite. He did not bring it up immediately. He was a careful man, and he did not want to move faster than was right for the specific, real, complicated thing they had. But Lily's question had named something that had been forming for a while. The way a word you've been reaching for suddenly appears, and you realize you knew it all along. He brought it up in October, on her porch, on a cool evening when the street had the particular stillness of autumn and the leaves from the tree at 42 were beginning to accumulate on everyone's sidewalk in a way that Frank Alderman addressed each morning with a leaf blower he deployed with excessive commitment. Lily asked me something in September, he said. Nora looked at him over her mug. What did she ask? If you were going to live with us. The mug paused on the way to her mouth. She set it back down. She asked that. In the middle of the swings, very casual. Nora was quiet for a moment. She looked at the street. At Frank's yard, which was immaculate because of the leaf blower situation. At the Kowalski driveway where Biscuit was visible through the gate, doing something inadvisable with a plastic bottle. What did you tell her? She said. That I didn't know, that we hadn't talked about it. She turned to look at him. And now you're talking about it. I'm starting to, he said. I'm not asking you to decide anything right now. I just want you to know it's something I think about. Do you want that? She said. Direct, as always. Not what Lily wants. What do you want? He looked at her in the October evening, this woman who had turned down a good life somewhere else because the real thing was here, who had learned where his bread was and still asked before she took it, not because she was uncertain of her welcome, but because she was precise about the difference between what was offered and what was assumed. Who read books with broken spines and drank tea with too much milk and told him true things without softening them into palatability and had, over the course of about a year, become the most essential presence in his life after his daughter. Yes, he said. I want that. She looked at him for a long time, the specific, steady look she had when she was taking something in fully, not rushing toward a response. I need you to understand something, she said. If that ever happens, and I'm not saying yes or no right now, I'm saying if it has to be because it's right, not because it's practical or convenient or because Lily asked, because it's the actual right thing. I know. I'm serious, Ethan. I spent years watching women make decisions because they were easier than the alternative. I will not do that. She held his gaze. I want to. I want to get to the place where it's the obvious true thing and not just the next logical step. That's the only way I'd want it, he said. She picked her mug back up, turned it in her hands. Okay, she said. Okay, you'll think about it? Okay, I'm already thinking about it. She almost smiled. I've been thinking about it since September. I just didn't know you were too. He looked at her. We're bad at telling each other things sometimes. We're getting better, she said. They were. November arrived, and with it Thanksgiving, which had its own particular gravity on Carver Street. The holiday worked differently here than in neighborhoods where people kept more to themselves. People moved between houses. There were standing invitations and understood expectations, and the general understanding that nobody on Carver Street ate Thanksgiving dinner alone if the rest of the street knew about it. Lily was home for Thanksgiving. Claire had her for Christmas this year, as per the rotation, which meant Ethan had her for the holiday that involved cooking, which he'd been managing with increasing competence across the previous months. He decided in October that he was going to host. Not a formal dinner. Nothing catered, nothing that required staff, nothing that used the dining room's good china. Just the kitchen table and the people he wanted at it. The list was short. Marcus and Sophie Chen, who'd been suggesting they come visit since the wedding and who Ethan had finally named a date for. Mrs. Donnelly, who had declining family in Boston and whom Ethan had been inviting to holidays for 2 years, and who always said no until this year, when she said yes, which he suspected had something to do with Nora having asked her separately. Nora's sister Janet and her husband and their 3 children, who would require the folding table from the garage and a high level of noise tolerance, and Nora herself, who had been part of the planning from the beginning and whose contribution was the sides, specifically the rice and beans that Lily had been requesting since spring, and a sweet potato thing that she made from her grandmother's proportions, which she carried in her head because she'd never written them down. Frank Alderman was invited. He sent a note, an actual handwritten note, slid under the door, saying he had plans with his son's family in Connecticut, but he appreciated the invitation and they should save him a plate. Ethan did. But the day had the shape of things that are planned, but live in the doing, not the planning. The kitchen at number 38 was full by noon. Janet's children, 8, 6, and 3, arrived like a weather event and distributed themselves throughout the house with the efficiency of experienced explorers, the 3-year-old making an immediate beeline for Professor Waffles, who was recovered from a couch. Lily received this interest in her bear with the magnanimity of a host who has decided to be generous about her things, which lasted approximately 9 minutes before she reclaimed Professor Waffles with the explanation that he needed to help with the cooking. Marcus and Sophie arrived at 1, Sophie still with the particular warmth she'd had at her own wedding, Marcus with a bottle of wine, and the expression of a man who had been told the story of how his roommate ended up with the woman from table 9 and found it deeply satisfying. "You sat down next to her at the overflow table," Marcus said, in Ethan's kitchen while Ethan was navigating the turkey situation. At my wedding, something good happened to you." "Something good happened at your wedding to you too," Ethan said. "I'm just saying the optics are interesting." Marcus was grinning. "I'm glad you're happy, man. You look different." "Different how?" "Less like you're carrying a building on your back." He paused. "Someone else said that, recently." "Frank Alderman," Ethan said. "Frank Alderman told you." "Frank Alderman tells everyone everything. He just does it individually, so you think it's personal." Marcus laughed. Ethan went back to the turkey. Sophie found Nora in the kitchen helping with the sides, and the two of them had the particular reunion of women who have maintained an unlikely friendship across distance and circumstance. Sophie held Nora's hands and looked at her and said, "You look good. You look settled." And Nora said, "I am mostly." And Sophie looked at the kitchen of number 38 around them and looked at Nora's face and clearly formed an opinion that she kept to herself for now, which was probably wise. Mrs. Donnelly arrived at 1:30 with a pie she'd made without telling anyone she was making it. A deep dish apple, which was Lily's favorite and which Lily discovered and announced with the alarm of someone receiving unexpectedly good news. The folding table from the garage turned out to be slightly too small for Janet's family. They added 2 chairs from the study and a booster seat that turned out to belong to a development stage Lily had passed 2 years ago, but which they cleaned off and used anyway, and the 3-year-old was strapped in and given a bread roll to occupy her and seemed satisfied. By 3 o'clock, the house had the particular fullness that comes from real use. Too many voices, something on the stovetop that needed watching, biscuits barking from down the street audible through the window. Nora had cracked to let steam out. The sound of Marcus and Janet's husband discovering they both had opinions about a sports team and beginning the specific negotiation of strangers who may or may not agree. The 3-year-old explaining something to Professor Waffles in a private language that Lily was attempting to translate with limited success. Ethan stood in the doorway between the kitchen and the living room for a moment, a dish towel over his shoulder, and just looked at it. All of it, the mess of it. The particular beautiful inconvenience of a house full of real people having a real day. Nora passed him on the way to the stove, touched his arm briefly, not stopping, just that brief contact, and he watched her go back to whatever needed doing, and he thought, this. The same word he'd thought in February in the snow, watching her and Lily with the failed dinosaur. This is the thing. Not the fund. Not the acquisition. Not the resume of a life well constructed for external measurement. This kitchen with the slightly uneven tile grout, full of people who had arrived by various accidental and intentional routes, on a Thursday in November, loud and imperfect and entirely real. Dinner was chaotic in the best sense. The food was good. The turkey was slightly overdone on one side, which Ethan acknowledged and which nobody cared about, and the sweet potato thing from Nora's grandmother's proportions was the thing people came back for twice, including Marcus, who asked for the recipe and was told by Nora that she didn't have it written down. It was just what her hands knew to do. Sophie, at some point during dinner, said, "Okay, I need to know the whole story, from the beginning." This was directed at both Ethan and Nora, who looked at each other across the table. "There's not much to tell," Ethan said. "There is absolutely much to tell," Sophie said. "You met at my wedding, at the overflow table. And now—" She gestured at the table, at the house, at the general situation. There is a whole story. "He sat down next to me," Nora said, "and we talked. And then? He drove home. I drove home. We lived 3 doors apart." "We found that out that night," Ethan said. "At the table." Sophie looked between them. "You didn't know?" "We'd never spoken," Nora said. "I'd seen his porch light. He'd seen my chairs." "The mismatched chairs," Ethan confirmed. Sophie pressed her hands flat on the table. "This is— Marcus, this is because of our wedding." "Yes," Marcus said, "our overflow table." "To be fair, it was specifically because someone stole my seat at table 4, Ethan said. "Ethan?" Sophie looked at him. "Someone stealing your seat at table 4 is the best thing that ever happened to you." He looked at Nora across the table. "Yeah," he said, "it is." Nora was looking at her plate. Not hiding, she didn't hide things. Just taking a moment with the fact of something. Janet, Nora's sister, who had been listening to this with the expression of someone who had heard pieces of the story, but not the whole of it assembled like this, said quietly, "You never told me how you met." "You never asked for the full version," Nora said. "I'm asking now." "Wedding," Nora said. "Overflow table. He made scrambled eggs." She paused. "I stayed." Janet looked at her sister for a moment. Something passed between them. The specific shorthand of sisters who have known each other through difficult years and good ones, who understand what the other has come through without having to enumerate it. "Good," Janet said simply. The table moved on. Janet's 8-year-old had opinions about the pie. The 3-year-old fell asleep in the booster seat before dessert, which Mrs. Donnelly managed with the practiced efficiency of a woman who had raised 4 children and considered this a normal dinner outcome. Marcus and Janet's husband arrived at some kind of accord about the sports team, based on the sudden warmth in their conversation. Lily ate 2 pieces of pie and negotiated a third with the focused energy of someone who understood the stakes. And Sophie leaned over to Ethan when the conversation had fragmented into smaller threads and no one was specifically listening to them, and said, "She turned down a job to stay, didn't she?" He looked at Sophie. "How did you know?" "She told me. Not the details. Just that she'd had an opportunity and decided it wasn't what she wanted." Sophie looked at Nora across the table, who was helping the 6-year-old with something that had gone wrong with his napkin. "She said she knew what she was choosing." "She did," he said. "And you knew she'd turned it down." "Yes." "And you didn't try to stop her or convince her?" "No." Sophie was quiet for a moment. Then, "That's why it works. You know that, right? Not the wedding, not the overflow table. That. The fact that you let her choose." He thought about this. "She would have chosen anyway," he said. "Regardless of what I did. That's just who she is." "I know," Sophie said. "That's also why it works." Young. After dinner, after the dishes were begun, and the kids were in various states of post-pie collapse, and Marcus was deep in conversation with Janet's husband about something that had apparently migrated from sports to economic policy, Ethan found himself in the kitchen with the water running and his hands in soap, and Nora beside him drying. This was, he realized, a thing they did now. He washed, she dried. He didn't remember when it had become a division of labor. It had just become one. "Sophie cornered you," Nora said. "She did." "What did she say?" "That the overflow table was the best thing that ever happened to me." Nora dried a glass. "She's not wrong. She said the reason it works is because I let you choose." Nora was quiet for a moment, turning the glass in the dish towel. "What did you say?" "I said you would have chosen anyway, regardless of me." She set the glass down, picked up another one. "That's true," she said, "but it matters that you knew it." He thought about the 2 weeks in January, about standing on her porch in the cold and saying, "I don't want you to go," and then not saying it again, about letting her arrive at herself, at her own certainty in her own way, and the specific discipline that had required from him. "I've learned some things," he said, "since the divorce, about what it means to actually be with someone, as opposed to the performance of it." He handed her a plate. "Claire and I, we were good at performing it. We were less good at actually seeing each other." He paused. "I didn't want to make that mistake again." "Did you see me?" she said. "From the beginning?" "I saw a woman listening to a string quartet like it was the most important thing in the room," he said, "at an overflow table where she'd arrived early because she didn't want anyone to watch her look for her seat." He handed her another plate. "Yeah, I saw you." She dried the plate slowly. "No one's ever said that to me," she said, not with self-pity, just as a true thing. "Most people see what they expect to see. Woman at the low table, woman in the work clothes, woman with the beat-up truck." She set the plate down. "You didn't look at me and see what wasn't there. You just looked at what was." "There was a lot there," he said. She looked at him. They were standing in the kitchen with soapy water and the sound of the table behind them and someone laughing loudly at something Marcus had said, and it was not a romantic moment in any cinematic sense. It was a wet hands, dish towel, after-dinner moment in a house full of people who had eaten too much. It was also, undeniably, one of the truest moments of his adult life. "Nora," he said. "Don't make it big," she said quietly. "I'm not making it big. I'm just going to say it." She waited. "I love you," he said. Flat, undramatic, true. She was still for a moment. Then she set the dish towel down, turned to face him directly with the water still running between them. "I know," she said. "I've known for a while." She held his eyes. "I love you too. I've been trying to figure out when to say it in a way that didn't feel like a response." And I think this is fine," she said. "Over the dishes, in November, with Janet's kid asleep in the next room and your daughter trying to negotiate a third piece of pie." "This is fine," he agreed. "Not very poetic," she said. "Still real," he said. She picked the dish towel back up. He turned the water off. They finished the dishes in the ordinary quiet of two people who have said the necessary thing and do not need to continue talking about it, which was its own kind of fluency. By 8:30, the house had emptied in stages. Janet and her family left first, the three children in various states of wakefulness that had to be managed through coats and car seats, and the retrieval of Professor Waffles from the 3-year-old, who had held him through the whole meal and was now bonded in a way that required negotiation. Mrs. Donnelly left with the remaining pie, which she insisted was too much for one house, and which Ethan knew she would eat alone over 3 mornings and enjoy thoroughly. Sophie hugged Nora for a long time at the door and said something in her ear that Ethan didn't hear, and Nora nodded and said something back. Marcus shook Ethan's hand at the door. Not the professional handshake, the other one, the one from college, that meant something specific about 20 years of knowing someone. "Table 9, Marcus said. "Table 9, Ethan agreed. "I'm going to take credit for this at every dinner party for the rest of my life." "You're welcome to," Ethan said. "Your seat-stealing cousin deserves some too." "I'll tell her. She'll be delighted." Marcus looked at him with the particular warmth of an old friend who has watched you go through hard years and come out somewhere better. "You're good, man. You actually look good." "I am," Ethan said. He meant it without qualification. Lily fell asleep on the couch at 8:45, surrounded by the general debris of a well-used Thanksgiving, paper napkins, a drawing she'd been working on during the adult conversation portion of the evening, the library book that had now been extended twice. Nora sat beside her for a while, not moving her, just letting her sleep. Ethan cleaned the last of the kitchen. He did it slowly, without urgency, in the specific piece of a house that had been full and was now quieting down, settling into itself around the people who remained. He came to the doorway of the living room. Lily was asleep with her head on the armrest, breathing the slow breathing he'd memorized over 5 years of watching her sleep. Nora was reading. She'd found a book, one of his, something off the shelf in the living room, and she was reading it with the focused attention she gave everything she read. Her feet pulled up under her, the lamp beside her making the room feel exactly as warm as it was. She looked up when she heard him. "She's out," Nora said quietly. "Yeah. I should go." "You don't have to." She looked at him across the room. "Ethan, I'm not," he said. "I just mean you don't have to go on my account. You can stay." He paused. "You can always stay." She held his eyes. Something moved through her expression. The same thing that had moved through it in the hallway in January, when she'd stood there and told him she'd turned down Portland. The particular look of someone encountering something real and taking a moment to let it be real. She looked down at the book, closed it. "Okay," she said. He carried Lily upstairs. She was getting too big for this. She'd tell him so herself in a few months. But for now, she fit in his arms, and he carried her the way he'd carried her at 2 and 3 and 4, up the stairs and into the dinosaur room and under the covers. He pulled the blanket up, turned the lamp to sleepy orange, stood in the doorway. He thought about a question she'd asked on a swing set in September. "Is Nora going to live with us?" With the breezy practicality of a child who identified a gap and saw no reason not to name it. He thought about October on the porch. I want to. I want to get to the place where it's the obvious, true thing. He thought about over the dishes 20 minutes ago. "I love you, I've known for a while." He went back downstairs. Nora had moved from the couch to the kitchen, had made 2 cups of tea, his with less milk because she'd been paying attention, and was sitting at the island in the particular way she sat there, like she'd always had the right to the stool. He sat across from her. The house was quiet. The street outside was quiet. It was Thanksgiving night, and the world had the specific settled quality of a holiday that had done what it was supposed to do. "Lily's going to tell everyone at school that Nora slept over," he said. "I'm sleeping in the guest room," Nora said. "Lily is going to tell everyone at school that Nora slept over," he repeated. She considered this. "That's fair." He picked up his tea. She picked up hers. "I've been thinking," she said after a while, "about what you said in October." "What specifically?" "You know what specifically." He looked at her. She turned her mug in her hands. "I'm not ready to say yes to anything tonight," she said. "I want to be clear about that. I'm not there yet, and I don't want to get there before I'm there." "I know. But I'm closer than I was." She looked up at him. "I wanted you to know that." He thought about patience, about the difference between waiting for something to happen to you and choosing to wait because the thing is worth waiting for properly. He'd learned it late in life, this distinction, the way you sometimes learn the most important things, after they've already cost you something. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. "I know you're not." She held his gaze. "That's why I'm closer." They sat with their tea in the kitchen of number 38 on a Thursday night in November, and outside Carver Street was dark and quiet, and the porch light at number 41 was on because Nora had left it on before she came over, because she always left it on, because that was the kind of thing you did when your porch light had become a signal that meant something. 3 doors. That's all it had ever been. 3 doors, 1 overflow table, 1 dance that started as courtesy and stopped being that. 1 woman who had listened to a string quartet like it mattered, and 1 man who had noticed. Here is what the story of Ethan Vale and Nora Bell is actually about. Underneath the wedding and the street and the Portland letter and the slow, careful accumulation of dinners and porch evenings and dishwater declarations of love. It is about the particular mistake that most people make at least once in their lives, which is confusing a life that looks right from the outside with a life that feels real from the inside. Ethan had built a life that looked right. The success was genuine. The house was real. The love for his daughter was the realest thing he'd ever felt. But somewhere in the machinery of all of it, he had stopped being entirely present inside his own existence. And he had not noticed this until a woman at a table 9 started answering his questions with actual truth. And he found himself leaning toward her the way you lean toward a sound you've been missing without knowing you missed it. And Nora had made the opposite mistake first. Not performing success, but contracting herself. Deciding, after disappointment, that wanting things was dangerous. Keeping her expectations calibrated to what she could reach without stretching, because stretching and not reaching was a specific kind of pain she had decided to stop accepting. She had made herself smaller than she was, for the sake of safety, and the cost of that was a life that was honest but airless. What they gave each other, in the end, was not what most people would point to as the dramatic thing. He did not rescue her from poverty, and she did not rescue him from loneliness, and it was not about that, and it was never about that. And Nora had been clear about this from the beginning, in the way she was clear about everything. What they gave each other was simpler and more difficult: permission. He gave her permission to want something real without suspecting her own motives for wanting it. She gave him permission to be present, actually fully, imperfectly present, instead of performing a version of himself that fit the room. Lily, for her part, had known all along. Children usually do. They don't have the vocabulary for this person. Makes our house feel inhabited in a way it wasn't before, but they feel the fact of it with their whole bodies, the way they feel temperature and hunger, and they respond accordingly. Lily responded by assuming Nora into the structure of her world with the calm certainty of someone who has identified a truth and sees no reason to debate it. This is also a story about the overflow table, about the fact that the best things in your life will often arrive at the place you were put because something else didn't work out. The table you ended up at because your seat was taken. The job you had to take when the other one fell through. The city you stayed in because the move got complicated. People spend a great deal of energy managing their way into the right rooms, and then the thing that changes everything happens at the table in the corner that nobody planned for. Ethan knew this about business. He'd built his professional life partly on the ability to find value in places other people had overlooked. He just never thought to apply the principle to himself, to the question of what he needed, to the woman sitting very still at the end of the overflow table, listening to music like it was the most important thing in the room. She had been there the whole time. He'd just had to be put in the right wrong place to find her. The last thing that happened that Thanksgiving was small, the way the last things often are. It was late. Nora had gone up to the guest room. Ethan had done a final pass through the kitchen, the way you do when you've hosted and the house is yours again, and you're just making sure everything is where it should be. He went to the window. Number 41. The porch light, on. 3 houses down, visible from here. He looked at it for a moment. He thought about November a year ago, standing in this driveway with the engine off after the wedding, watching the same light in the same window, not yet knowing what it would mean. Knowing only that a woman had listened to music like it mattered, and had said, "Everyone saw you choose me," and had looked at him with an evaluation that was both careful and entirely fair. He'd chosen her that night without understanding that he was choosing her. Sometimes you make the important choices before you know what they are. She had chosen him too. She'd told him so over a slow dance in his kitchen, with no one watching and nothing to perform. "I chose you that first night." 2 people at an overflow table choosing each other before they had the right words for it, before they had any idea where it would go, before the breakfasts and the dinners and the Portland letter and the February snow dinosaur and Lily on the swing set asking the question they'd both already been thinking about. He turned from the window. The house was quiet. His daughter was asleep in the dinosaur room. The woman he loved was asleep in the guest room. The porch light at number 41 was on. The paper chain from Christmas last year was long gone, but Lily had talked about making a new one, a bigger one, for the upcoming holidays. She'd announced this plan to Nora in October, and Nora had said she'd bring better tape this time. And Lily had said she would handle the scissors, and they'd shaken on it with the seriousness of a business arrangement. Ethan turned off the kitchen light. He went upstairs, checked on Lily. Sleepy orange lamp, dinosaur pajamas, Professor Waffles. All present. He stood in the hallway for a moment. Down the hall, the guest room door was closed. A thin line of light at the bottom. She was still reading. She was always still reading. He did not knock. That wasn't what this was. But he stood in the hallway and felt the particular fullness of a house that contains the right people, and he let himself have it without managing it down to something safer. He went to bed. He fell asleep faster than he had in years. Outside, Carver Street was quiet and dark except for the porch light at number 41, which stayed on all night, the way it always did, the way it had been doing since long before either of them understood what it meant to see it from the other end of the street. Some lights are just lights, and some lights are the thing you look for when you come home.